Today we discuss the idea of civilization. And first I want to present to you the general understanding of how we get civilization. Then I will present to you an alternative. Okay? So the traditional understanding is the Marxist understanding. This is the idea proposed by Karl Marx, and it's the dominant idea. So in the beginning, we were hunter-gatherers. And it sucked to be a hunter-gatherer because you could not find food. And then we discovered agriculture, farming. And that allowed for surplus food. Surplus just means that you have more food than you can eat. And so now you have people who don't have to work, okay, an elite. And as such, they can engage in activities that improve the well-being of everyone and which create the basis for civilization. These things include religion, okay, which is just myths and stories, but also arts, dance, music, songs, paintings. And then, of course, you have science and technology. And with these three things in place, now you can grow as a society. Okay? You can now build cities. Why? Because now you can have irrigation and farming. Okay? You can now direct the river flow so you can use more farmland. Okay? You can now have a hereditary elite. And so that these people can focus their entire time on innovation, on science, on progress. Okay? And then you have writing. Because only a hereditary elite has the time and the resources to learn how to write. Because remember, back then, writing is a very difficult activity. You have to spend your entire life learning it and practicing it. And then you have the idea of money and property. Okay? And together, these four things are what we refer to as civilization. Okay? Now, there are good things that come from civilization, religion, arts, and science, but there are also bad things as well, which include war, slavery, and debt. Okay? And that is a story of civilization that you are taught in school and that most mainstream academics understand. Today, I want to propose an alternative. And I think this is a much more compelling alternative than this one. And the idea is this. From the very beginning, we were religious, artistic, and capable of science. Okay? We do not need an elite to do this for us. We are all capable of doing this by ourselves. And the examples, of course, are the cave paintings that we discussed, as well as these religious settlements, Göbekli Tepe, Karahoyak. Okay? And as we discussed before, people come together to practice their religion, building temples, building monuments. And then slowly, around these temples, you have development of farming in order to sustain these temples, in order to practice the religion. But over time, what happens is that the temple people become corrupt. Rather than being elected by the people, rather than serve the people, they become hereditary, okay? They engage in rent-seeking. And so what people do is they just leave and build a temple somewhere else. Okay? And throughout this time, all these temples are being built. But in certain locations, the temples can also engage in trade. Why? Because they're the meeting place of many, many other communities. And as such, their real estate is the most valuable in the world. And so it's hard for people to leave, and the place just grows and grows and grows. And as this civilization grows, the people in charge create something called a temple economy. Okay? And this is just a primitive form of taxation. Basically what happens is that everyone brings food to the temple, and the priests then redistribute the food amongst everyone else. Okay? And that allows for public works projects, like irrigation, mainly irrigation, but also more temples. Okay? And because of this economy, now you need writing. You need to record how much food you have. You have to record who gets what food, the rations. You also need to record trade, right? How much grain you're getting from here, how much cows you're giving to over there, okay? Now you have a writing system, then you have money. But as this civilization develops, a strict hierarchy emerges. And the hierarchy goes against the natural order. Also remember that people at any time can just choose to leave. So how do you make people stay where they are and just follow the natural order? Well, now you have to create mythology. Okay? Which then you encode or write down, so that it seems as though it's coming from the gods themselves. Okay, does that make sense? In other words, civilization did not give us religion, arts, and science. We already had these things. We could at any time in our history do all these things. Civilization is a device meant to gaslight or fool people into believing that a hierarchy is legitimate when it is not legitimate. It is meant to fool people into thinking of that this hierarchical system is divinely ordained. Okay? So that's the argument I will make to you today. Before I continue, are you clear about this framework? This is a traditional framework. This is what you've been taught in school. The problem with this framework is that it assumes that we're all stupid. And if we're all stupid, it's hard to explain how we did the cave paintings, how we built Keblo Tepe, okay? How we did Karahoyak. It assumes all these things. This new understanding is that we're all capable of creativity, but eventually, because of social development, we have these large cities, and now the people in charge need to create civilization in order to justify the hierarchy. Okay? All right. So having said that, let's look at the 4 earliest major civilizations in our history. And they are, of course, Egypt, Mesopotamia, which is modern-day Iraq, the Indus Valley civilization. This is also referred to as the Harappan, okay? Harappan civilization, because their capital is Harappa. And then the last one, of course, is China, right? Now the question then is, why is that these 4 are the earliest civilizations? And they have 3 unique characteristics, okay? The first is their latitude. They're actually in the same latitude. They're not too hot and they're not too cold, which makes them perfect for agriculture. Okay, that's the first characteristic. Second characteristic is that they are by major rivers, right? So Egypt is, of course, by the Nile. Mesopotamia has something called the Tigris and the Euphrates. Indus Valley, of course, has the Indus River, and China has, of course, the Yellow River, okay? That's the second major characteristic. This allows for you to build a fairly large city, okay? Because now you can solve the water and transportation problem, okay? And also agriculture. And the last characteristic, which is the most important, is they're by the sea or they're by the ocean, which allows for them to engage in trade, okay? Transportation, bringing in new goods, new people, and new ideas. So Egypt has the Mediterranean as well as the Red Sea. Mesopotamia goes into the Arabian Sea, which goes into the Indian Ocean. And so the Indians is the same situation, okay? Goes in the Arabian Sea and then the Indian Ocean. China, of course, goes into the Pacific. All right? So what will happen over time is that because of the trade location, they're able to build a very large city, okay, over time. So, but then what will happen is that as larger city becomes larger and larger, they will develop colonies upstream and downstream of the river, okay? So they will build more colonies, and this is how you get civilization. Okay? You always have a major city, and as it becomes too big, you have other places in order to expand your trade reach. Okay? So the priority is trade. And as you can see, what's happening is that these areas are able to connect the entire world, right? So Egypt is able to connect Europe and the Levant and Africa. Okay? Mesopotamia is able to connect Anatolia, Asia, Central Asia, and then Indus Valley is able to do the same thing, okay? China is a special case because of the Himalayas. So there is trade actually between China and these other parts, but not as much. And so China is a special case, and so that's why we don't discuss China in this class, okay? So these three places are what we collectively call Western civilization. So you may have thought that Western civilization is just Europe and America. That's not true. Okay, if you just look at the history, these places have always been in contact with each other. And collectively, they built the foundations for Western civilization. Let me ask you this question. Looking at this map, where is the most strategically located place? You guys know? It's here, right? Does that make sense to you guys? This is right in the center of global trade. And guess what? This place is where human civilization began. This place is what we call Sumeria, Sumer, okay? And this is where writing was invented, okay? And this is where a lot of trade happened. Because if you just look at this map, Sumeria is what connects everyone to everyone else, right? If you're in the Indus Valley civilization and you want to get through Egypt, you have to first transport your goods to Sumeria, which then overland takes it to Egypt. Same thing with Egypt, okay? Same thing if you want to reach everywhere else. Does that make sense? That's why Sumeria was the first major civilization, okay? And they invented writing, as well as irrigation, as well as a lot of technology. And there's been a lot of debate about Sumeria, because one thing that puzzles scholars and historians is the language the Sumerians speak is not the same as the surrounding areas, okay? So that's why a lot of historians believe that the people in Sumeria came from somewhere else. And that may be true. Why? Because this is the major trade route, right? And it's possible that what happened was that different people came together in this area to trade, and they formed their own language. That is possible. Okay? Also, scholars have been surprised or amazed at the rapid development of Sumeria. And that's why, okay, I don't know why, but there are some people on the internet who believe that aliens came to Sumeria and created humans. Okay? These aliens are called the Anunnaki. And it's a really stupid idea. And what you learn in this class is that if you put humans together and they need to do something, they will do it very well. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay? Necessity is the mother of creativity. It's because they have to come together to trade, to interact, that they create their own writing system. Okay, so if I were to take different people from the world and just dump them on an island, you guys would really quickly be able to develop your own language, your own writing system, your own civilization. Because again, necessity is the mother of invention. All right. All right. So that's the general framework we're working with. Any questions before I continue? Okay, good. All right. So let's do the PPT. All right. So in this class, I want to talk about how, because of civilization development, they start to promote writing and promote mythology. Okay? And what I will show you is that by studying mythology properly, you can actually decode or uncover or reveal the history of the civilization, even though it may be lost to us. Okay? All right. Let's continue. All right. So one principle that I want you to learn about human history is that it's a constant process of inversion. Okay? And what I mean by that is that as humans progress, or as human society grows and grows, they need to constantly innovate in their system, and they do it through inversion. So during the cave painting era, it was an egalitarian society, which was fluid, which was dynamic, and they were animistic, which meant that they believed that everything had God in it, okay? They were all part of God. And then with agriculture, you had the mother goddess civilization because you needed fertility, right? The mother goddess is able to give you more children as well as help you grow crops. But over time, as society became larger and larger, they started to go war with each other, okay? And now the male overtakes the female. Rather than worship the mother goddess, they now worship the sky god. And before, during the mother goddess, it was assumed that the mother goddess serves us because she's kind, she's compassionate. But now the sky god, we have to serve the gods, okay? And then as society becomes more hereditary, what happens often are civil wars where the prince kills the king, okay? The son kills the father in an inversion, okay? The last process is that over time, as society becomes more populated, you need a bureaucracy. What will happen is that the bureaucrats will collude together to steal power from the king, okay? The servant rules the king, okay? So this is a major pattern of historical development that I want you guys to remember. Remember that history is a constant process of inversion, okay? Where the old order is being dethroned by the new order. Okay, so that's one idea I want you guys to remember, okay? All right, so basic framework we're working with is that before we started the mother goddess, where women were in control, and they focus on balance and harmony, okay, and fertility. And their understanding of the mother goddess is that she's kind and she's compassionate. Okay, so you don't really have to work that much. You just have to respect her, and she will provide you with a lot of babies and a lot of good food, okay? Now we go to the sky god. And different societies have different sky gods, but they're basically the same concept. So in Egypt, they have Ra. In Babylon, they have Marduk. In Greece, they have Zeus. In Rome, they have Jupiter, right? And the sky god demands struggle and toil, okay, to rape, exploit, control the earth, to take the mother goddess and to control her, okay? And you do that by building canals, by building farms. So it's a constant process of exploitation, okay? Not only exploiting nature, the mother goddess, but you're also exploiting each other. You go to war, you conquer other people, you enslave them, okay? It's a constant process of sacrifice and discipline. Okay, so this is the major transition. All right, so the four major civilizations we talked about, as you can see from this map, they're the same latitude, right? China's over here, again, because of the Himalayas, they're blocked from the rest of the world, okay? But these three areas, Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Indus Valley, you can see how close they are to each other and how they can easily access each other through the sea, right? And once they're able to access each other, they can then access other parts of the world as well. So right from the beginning, guys, it's really important, Western society was integrated through trade, through communication. And so the ideas, the people, were always in exchange with each other. Okay, so you cannot understand the development of Egypt in isolation from Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley. Okay, they will all influence each other. Unfortunately, because of Western prejudice, you're often taught that these things are separate from each other. Okay? But they existed in dialogue with each other. All right. So the cradle of civilization is the Middle East. Why? Because of the Fertile Crescent. Okay? So Sumer is where we consider the cradle of civilization. Because as I mentioned to you, it is the center of all global trade. It's where all civilizations meet. But as you can also see, it's also extremely fertile. Okay? So this has historically been the wealthiest part of the world. Strategically, it's the most important part of the world, and it's still true even today. Okay? That's why you have all these wars in the Middle East. That's why America is so supportive of Israel. Okay, so as I mentioned to you, what will happen is that because of trade, Uruk will become a large city. And then as the city becomes larger and larger, it will establish colonies elsewhere as well. And these will become the major city-states of Mesopotamia. And for thousands of years, they will fight each other until Sargon of Akkad unifies this region, okay? Sumer is impressive. They're known for their canals, they're known for their irrigation. And again, scholars are sort of mesmerized by how they're able to do this. But one thing that you learn in this class is that when humans come together for religious purposes, they're capable of doing amazing stuff. These are zaggurats, they're temples. Okay? And these zaggurats were the center of their civilization. Remember that all cities start off with a temple that then builds out outwards, okay? And these zaggurats are important because they are literally considered the home of their gods. And these places are sacred. So only priests are allowed to go inside it. People can deliver gifts to the gods through the priests. But the people themselves are not allowed to interact with the priests. And that's how the priests are able to keep control over the cities, okay? And the priests themselves are considered servants of the gods. This is cuneiform, okay? This is cuneiform, which is the first writing system ever invented. What's interesting about this is how they did this. So what they did was this. They just took clay from the riverbeds, okay? And then before it hardens, you just take a reed and you write down some marks in the clay. And then what you do is this. You just put it out in the sun and then it hardens, right? And it's there forever. That's why we still have them today, because rock does not decay, okay? And that's why we know more about Sumeria than we know about other places. For most of agricultural history, we celebrate the mother goddess, okay? But then, as I mentioned, over time, as society becomes larger and larger, the men start to take control. And so they inverted the mythology of the mother goddess. Now, the sky god, who is Marduk here, kills the mother goddess to create the world. Okay? A process of inversion. So, to understand this process, we will read the most famous epic from Mesopotamia called the Enuma Elish. Enuma Elish means from up high. So it's the Bible, basically. It's like what God told us. And this is a story of the creation of the world. Okay, so what's really important to understand is that all the stories are written down in stone, okay? And again, guys, they didn't have to do this because everyone was able to memorize the story line for line. And that's what we did historically. So why did they write this in stone? For propaganda purposes, right? It's the same as in today's world, you go see a film. When you see a film, you're mesmerized, you're hypnotized by the beauty of it. And you must think that this film must be the gods speaking themselves. Okay, you don't think about, okay, how did they put this together? Your mind doesn't think like that. Your mind's like, oh my God, this is an image before me, therefore it must be true. Okay, and that's why they wrote stuff down for propaganda purposes. Now, what's interesting is that there's different writing systems around the world. So in Mesopotamia, they had these cave tablets, right? But in Egypt, as you may know, they have papyrus. Okay, papyrus are these plants. They take out the plants and then put them together in the sun. Okay, and then they become like these scrolls that you can write on. In China, of course, have the paper. So what's interesting is that when the need arises for writing, we always find like creative ways to express ourselves in writing. Okay? Papyrus scrolls don't really last that long. That's why we know less about Egypt than we know about Mesopotamia. All right, so the Enuma Elish was written on cave tablets. So let's go over the story, the Enuma Elish. So in the beginning, there are two major gods, Apsu and Tiamat. Apsu means fresh water. Tiamat means salt water. Okay? Fresh water, of course, is the river. Salt water is the ocean. Okay? When they come together to create all possible life, including their children, the new gods. Tiamat and Apsu create these new gods, but they're children, so they're really loud. And Apsu is like, you know what? These children are really annoying. I want to kill them. Tiamat overhears this, and Tiamat tells her children who rebel and kill Apsu. But then Tiamat's like, you know what? They killed my husband. So now she's pissed, okay? So she decides she's going to go kill her children too. She has a general, and there is this huge army, and they start to attack their children. These children are thrown aback by Tiamat. So they elect a new champion called Marduk, the thunder god, the sky god, to lead them into battle against Tiamat. And in the final battle, Marduk, who's also called BL, he kills Tiamat, okay? Now what happens afterwards is really interesting because after he kills Tiamat, the mother goddess, he takes her body, and then from her body, he builds an entire world. He builds both the sky and the planet Earth, okay? So let's read some lines. BL rested, serving the corpse, in order to divide the lump by a clever scheme. He split her into two like a dried fish, okay? So he literally cut her like a fish. One half of her he set up and stretched out as the heavens. He built the sky from her body. He stretched the skin and appointed a watch with the instruction not to let her waters escape. He crossed over the heavens, surveyed the celestial parts, and adjusted them to match the Apsu, known as abode. So Apsu was the husband who was killed. Beat measured the shape of the Apsu and set up Ezra, a replica of Escala, and Escala, Ezra, which he had built, and the heavens he settled in the shrines Anu, Enlil, and El, okay? So what's important to understand is this. He's doing this to the mother goddess, okay? So not only is Marduk proclaiming a new order, but he's also proclaiming new values of struggle, exploitation, toil, right? Before, the mother goddess was a religion of balance and harmony. Don't destroy things. Worship the animals as they're your friends. If you kill them, make sacrifices to them. And now this new religion is, no, destroy the world and make it yours, okay? So this is a civilization that practices irrigation, right? Because irrigation really is about controlling the earth. All right, let's continue. All right, so what happens now is that after Marduk creates the world, he has to establish a bureaucratic order, okay? A hierarchical order. So he says, he fashioned heavenly stations for the great God and set up constellations, the patterns of the stars. He appointed the year, marked off divisions, and set up 3 stars each for the 12 months, okay? So he's basically building a calendar. The idea here is that all these were bureaucratic inventions in Samaria in order to better govern the people, right? What this myth is doing, the Enuma Elish is doing, is proclaiming that the bureaucratic world is divinely ordained, okay? This didn't come from the priests, it came from the gods. The priests are just the messengers. All right, let's continue. All right, so now that Marduk has built this world, he's like, you know what? I'm tired and I want a place to rest. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to build a house, which is my temple, and then I'm going to make slaves in order to serve me. And these slaves are called humans, okay? That's why we were invented, to serve the gods. Before we understood that the gods served us, helped us. or loved us. And now we must become slaves to the gods. Beneath the celestial parts, whose floor I made firm, I will build a house to be my luxurious abode. Within I will establish a shrine. I will found my chamber and establish my kingship. Okay? All right, so now he's going to turn humans into slaves. He conceived a desire to accomplish clever things. He opened his mouth, addressing Eel. He counsels that which he had pondered in his heart. I will bring together blood to form bone. I will bring into being Lula, whose name shall be man. Okay? All right. And the gods, by the way, are called the Anunnaki. Okay? That's why there are conspiracy theorists on the internet who say that we were invented by the Anunnaki. All right. So what Marduk does is that he takes his enemy, Tingu, and then he kills him, and then from his blood, he will create mankind. Okay? They bound him, holding him before Ale. They inflicted the penalty on him and severed his blood vessels. From his blood, he created mankind, on whom he imposed the service of the gods and set the gods free. Okay? Now, what's really interesting for us to remember is that throughout this poem, Marduk has different names, Bel, Eel, okay? And the reason why is that what happens in these epics is they take different traditions and they combine together into one composite story, okay? All right. After the wise Eel had created mankind and had imposed the service of the gods upon them, that task is beyond comprehension, for Nimrod performed the creation with the skill of Marduk. King Marduk divided the gods, or the Anunnaki, okay, the gods, into upper and lower groups. He assigned 300 in the heavens to guard the decrees of Anu and appointed them as a guard. Okay? So now he's going to create this hierarchy. So yes, all humans are slaves, but there's some humans who are better slaves than other humans, okay? And that's what explains the hierarchy. So as you can see, the Enumerated Lash, it was written in order to justify the existing power structure. And honestly, this is a concept that's still true today, right? Why do we have schools? Why do we have media? Why do we have entertainment? It's to justify the existing power structure and social order, okay? All right. Now we get towards the end, and this is to establish that Babylon is the divine city. If it's divine, it means you can't leave it. You all want to be here, even though being in Babylon means you're enslavement, okay? Let us make a shrine of great renown. Your chamber will be our resting place, wherein we may repose. Let us erect a shrine to house a pedestal, where we may repose when we finish the work. When Marduk heard this, he beamed as brightly as the light of day. Build Babylon, the task you have sought. Let bricks for it be molded and raise the shrine. The Anunnaki wield the pick. For 1 year, they made the needed bricks, okay? So Babylon, the capital, is a city made by the gods for the gods. And then humans are there to serve the gods. Okay, so this is the divine order. This is the mandate of heaven. Okay, and as you will see, this is not just true for Mesopotamia, for Babylon, but also true for all major civilizations, including Egypt. Okay, so this is a tapestry from Egypt. As you can see, the gods are in control. The gods are the puppet masters, and the kings are just being controlled by the gods, and then humans just do what the gods demand of them, okay? This is just the natural order. This is the mandate of heaven. This is the way that it should be. Okay, now let's talk about the Epic of Gilgamesh. So there are two major literary achievements of Mesopotamia. The first is the Enumerated Lash. The second is something called the Epic of Gilgamesh. As you can see, Gilgamesh, he is a giant human. He's a king. He's considered the first king of Uruk, okay? And he's so big that a lion is his pet. Okay? What happens is that Gilgamesh is a king, but he's a tyrant. So he takes the men to war and he sleeps with all the women. So the people cry to the gods for relief from Gilgamesh. So the gods create Enkidu from clay, okay? And this is very similar to the story of Adam in the Bible. And Enkidu is like an animal. But then Gilgamesh sends a prostitute to seduce him and then becomes civilized, okay? And now Enkidu and Gilgamesh fight. And when they fight, they realize that they can't beat each other. So they decide to become best friends. They're best friends now, and they embark on all these adventures together. They go kill these divine beings. They go kill the protector of the forest. They kill a divine bull. The gods are now kind of pissed at them because they're disrupting the natural order, okay? So the gods have a meeting. They decide that one of them must die. So they kill Enkidu. When Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh is heartbroken. And he's scared because he's afraid that he will die as well. So he sets on a quest for immortality, okay? He goes and tries to figure out how to live forever. He ultimately fails, okay? And it ends with Gilgamesh returning home, and he sees happiness in the walled cities, in his people being happy, okay? So the moral of the story is that immortality is not about living forever. Immortality is about doing great things for your people so that you'll be remembered forever, celebrate forever. So the irony is that even though Gilgamesh failed in his quest, he ultimately succeeded in his mission because we have his epic, and so we're able to celebrate him even today. Okay, so it's a story that is being told. The question now is, why is this story being told? And one theory is that this is a concept of kingship. Being a king means not doing whatever you want. Being a king means to serve the people so that people will celebrate you and remember you forever and immortalize you in writing. Okay? That's a theory. All right, but ultimately Gilgamesh is a bureaucratic creation. And I'm going to explain to you how this creation works. Through this creation process, we can understand how human society develops over time. So in the beginning, what happens is that each region has local legends, okay? And these local heroes are celebrated through stories. So stories of demigods like Hercules, right? And the epic heroism. They have these stories because each region has a local king. And this local king says, well, I'm the descendant of Hercules, and therefore I should rule over you, okay? And what will happen is that these stories become a test for the king. If Hercules can fight a lion, then you are his ancestor, descendant, right? You are his descendant, therefore you should go fight a lion, okay? And that's how you justify your kingship, through these acts of heroism that's relayed to you in stories, okay? That's the first step. Second step is what happens is that as these different areas become consolidated into a much larger area, these stories themselves become consolidated. So Gilgamesh was basically different heroes. One king comes to dominate a region. Then what happens afterwards is that as the region becomes larger and larger, you need a bureaucracy. So bureaucratic priests come into power, they add in morality and messaging to control the people and the king. Okay, the major message is the king must serve the people, and then the priests control the king. But what will happen is that these different bureaucratic factions will fight each other, and they will have different versions of the story, okay? So bureaucratic priests take power, the morality and messaging changes, okay? As different bureaucratic priests take power, okay? The king must learn humility. So this is a hard thing to understand, but it's really important for us to understand, otherwise you cannot understand the Bible and other literary creations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an example to help you better understand this process of storytelling. All right, so let's imagine 3 universities, Ohio State University, Connecticut, and Middlebury. And they all have their own local legends, okay? So in these places, something happened that captured the imagination of all the students. So maybe at Ohio State University, Michael James gets drunk the night before examination, and he still manages to pass it. And the students are like, that's a great story, okay? But what happens over time is that because it's just a great story, as the story is told more and more, it becomes exaggerated. Why? Because it becomes exaggerated, it's much more interesting, it's become much more memorable, okay? And over time, people add color to it to make it even more memorable. If you don't do that, the story becomes forgotten, okay? So the only way to keep a story alive is by constantly exaggerating it and bringing color to it. So let's see what happens. Over time, the story becomes Michael James gets drunk before every examination and he scores 100, okay? That's an exaggeration. And then, over time, naturally, through the oral tradition, the story becomes even more exaggerated. Michael James bet his professor that he could get 100 on the exam while drunk. After James finished the exam, he vomited on the professor. He threw up on the professor. The professor could not do anything because James had got 100 on the exam. Okay? All right? So human beings just do this naturally. If something happens, they think it's interesting, then it becomes a legend, it becomes a story, okay? And this happens everywhere. So Connecticut College, a football player scores a winning touchdown, okay? And then it becomes exaggerated. The guy scores touchdown every game, and then even more exaggerated, the guy hits a home run to help his team win the championship, and then later that day, he scores a touchdown to win another, okay? So it becomes more exaggerated. And then let's look at the last one. At Middlebury College, Pat Jack drives to Canada to take a piss, okay? He just does that for no reason. Becomes more exaggerated. He goes to a new city every day to take a piss, okay? And then it becomes even more exaggerated. And now you add color and detail to it. Pat Jack drove to Canada and accidentally pissed on a sleeping bear, okay? He ran up a tree without his pants and forest rangers had to come rescue him. Okay? All right? So this is what happens naturally. The story becomes funnier, the story becomes more colorful, more detailed, more exaggerated, so that we're able to remember it, okay? And then over time, what happens is that these stories become consolidated, combined together to form a new story, okay? Harvard's most legendary student was Pitbull James. He once wrote an exam that no professor could pass. He once hit a home run with one arm. He once pissed on a sleeping bear just so he could knock down the bear with one punch, okay? So it becomes even more exaggerated, it becomes consolidated. Just as the Epic of Gilgamesh, okay? But then what happens is the bureaucrats take over. Okay? The people in charge take over, and they have to change the story in order to better control people. And there are different versions of this process. So let's look at 3. All right, you add just one line and you change the story, right? In the first version, when he became a billionaire, he gave it all to Harvard, okay? So obviously Harvard wrote this story to say, you know what, we don't care what you do as long as you give us money, okay? That's the first version. Second version is, when he wrote he found his true love, he settled down in the woods to write full time, okay? So this is seemingly the primacy of writers over athletes, okay? The smart over the brave. And the third is the bear ate him, okay? So he punched the bear and the bear decides to eat him, which is like, don't be a stupid athlete. Okay? And so when you add these actually lines, you make the story less interesting, less colorful. But you do so in order to better control how people think. And this is a process that we see throughout human history. So think of these classics, of these Chinese classics, right? 三国演义, Romance of the Three Kingdoms, COG, right? Journey to the West, 水浒传, right? Bandits of the Water Margin. If you read them, they're not that interesting. But before, you can imagine that they were interesting. But the bureaucrats took them and changed them into boring stories that they can now teach school children to brainwash them. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay, so that's a process of civilization. All right, so another example is Hesiod's Theogony. And he's talking about Greek mythology, okay? Greek religion. So the process goes like this. At first, Gaia, who's like the mother goddess, and Chaos, they give birth to the gods. Gaia marries one of these gods, Uranus, okay? And they give birth together to 12 titans. But Uranus doesn't really like children, so he beats up his children. So these children, with help from the mother, decides to rebel against Uranus. The youngest son, Cronus, kills Uranus. Okay? Then Uranus marries Rhea, and now Cronus is king, but he's afraid that his children will eventually rebel against him, just like he rebelled against his father. Therefore, he eats all his children. Rhea, the mother, is upset about this, so she decides, I'm going to give birth to Zeus in secret. So she runs off to an island, and she gives birth to him in secret, and he leaves Zeus there to grow up, okay? Eventually, he grows up, and then he goes back to Cronus. He becomes cupbearer to Cronus, and then poisons him, okay? And that's how Zeus becomes the ultimate king. What's really interesting for our purposes is that this myth influences the origin story of major historical figures, okay? So if you look at these major historical figures, you will find that it's a very similar story. So Sargon of Akkad, who founded the Akkadian Empire, Romulus and Remus, who founded Rome, King David, who founded Israel, and Genghis Khan of the Mongols, okay? They all share this similar origin story. So where do we get this origin story from? Okay, so going back, we're seeing 3 layers, right? So the first layer is the original layer, which is the animistic layer, okay? So different gods come together and they create humans. The second layer is when Cronus rebels against Uranus and establishes the kingship, okay? Right? The third layer is this. The third layer is the most interesting. Usually when you're king, you need a general. And what often happens is that the king likes to hire a foreign mercenary to be a general. Why? Because first of all, he's of low birth, right? Therefore, no legitimacy. Second, he's a foreigner, and therefore he doesn't have any political factions behind him. But often what happens is that this foreign mercenary is so talented that he's able to build a political faction to overthrow the king and become king himself because he's really talented. This is true for Genghis Khan. This is true for King David of Israel. This is true for Sargon of Akkad, okay? So there are lots of historical figures like that. Even in Chinese history, you have quite a few historical figures like this as well. So the founder of the Song dynasty was this sort of person. The problem, though, is that once he becomes king, he has a legitimacy problem. He's of low birth, he's a foreigner, right? So what do? You create a myth of Zeus, right? That Zeus himself was of low birth and a foreigner, but not really because he's a secret son of the king, okay? And that's why you have these stories. To legitimize the king. All right. So again, this follows the dynastic cycle, okay? So in the beginning, the high priestess, who represents the mother goddess, she has a consort. And so they establish a hereditary elite. But this hereditary elite makes people unhappy with the system. So then one prince or one of the sons decides, you know what, I'm going to form my own political faction. I'm going to become a warlord. I'm going to overthrow the queen and the king, okay? And so he slays the consort and marries the high priestess, okay, which is following the pattern of the mythology, right? Then what happens is that after the warlord dies, his son relies on a mercenary as general. The mercenary is often a foreigner and of low birth. Mercenary slays the warlord and makes himself king, okay? Okay? Does that make sense? This is a pattern that we see over and over in history. And this explains why the myths are constructed the way they are. Okay, so another way, a metaphor that we can use is think of myths and stories as like house renovation, okay? So when you renovate a house, you're adding different layers to it. Okay, that's literally what's happening. Okay, so we will look at one last story to show you how this writing process works. Remember, they invented writing in order to basically gaslight the people. So even though Samaria, Mesopotamia, is developing really quickly, as you can see from this map, it's still a very diverse place, okay? They have different forms of industry and economy. So maybe in the green, you have agriculture, but in the red, it's pastoral, meaning you're raising animals, sheep, goats, you're going all over the place, okay? So there are 2 different types of agriculture. The first form is you are sedentary. You just stay in one place and you grow your food. You grow your crops. You grow your plants. The second is pastoral, where you're going around and you are feeding your sheep and your goats, okay? If you're a king, or if you're a priest, if you're a bureaucrat, do you prefer agricultural people or pastoral people? Obviously agriculture. Why? Because it's easier to control them, okay? So what they do now is they're going to create these mythologies to convince people to give up the free, happy lifestyle of a pastoralist and become an enslaved farmer, okay? All right? And the question is how? Well, this is how. This is called the debate between the sheep and the grain, okay? So the sheep and the grain have this debate and they appear before the gods for judgment. The sheep says, I'm the better one. The grain says, no, I'm the better one, okay? So that's this debate. The sheep says this, and King of the gods, make me descend from the holy place, my most precious place. All the yarns about Otu, the splendor of kingship, belong to me. Second, king of the mountain embosses the king's emblems and puts his implements in order. He twists a giant rope against the great peaks of the rebel land, he the sling, the quiver, and the long bows. The watch over the elite troops is mine. Sustenance of the workers in the field is mine. The water skin of cool water and the sandals are mine. Sweet oil, the fragrance of the gods, mixed oil, pressed oil, aromatic oil, cedar oil for offerings are mine, okay? So I'm the sheep. Look how great I am, okay? I provide clothing for people. I provide sandals. I have oil, which makes people more fragrant. I also provide food for your soldiers. So I'm great. In the gown, my cloth of white wool, the king rejoices on his throne. My clothing is worn by the king himself. Isn't that proof that I'm the greatest? My body glistens on the flesh of the great gods. After purification priests, the incarnation priests, and the bathe priests have dressed themselves in me for my holy lustration. I walk with them to my holy meal. Okay? So the priests, when they make sacrifices, they sacrifice the sheep. The priests are not going to sacrifice grain, they sacrifice sheep, okay? But your hero, plowshare, binding, and sharps are tools that can be utterly destroyed. What can you put against me? And answer me what you can reply, okay? So that's the argument from the sheep. The grain says, when the bare dough has been carefully prepared in the oven and the mash tended in the oven, Nikashah mixes them for me while your big bully goats and rams are dispatched for my banquets. On the thick legs they are made to stand separate from my produce. Your shepherd on the high plain eyes my produce endlessly. When I am standing in a furrow in the field, my farmer chases away your herdsman with his cudgel. Even when they look out for you from the open country to the hidden places, your fears are not removed from you. Fang snakes and bandits, the creatures of the desert, want your life on the high plain. Every night your count is made and your tally stick put into ground, so your herdsman can tell people how many ewes there are and how many young lambs and how many goats and how many young kids. When gentle winds blow through the city and strong winds scatter, they build a milking pen for you. But when gentle winds blow through the city and strong winds scatter, I stand up as a equal to Iskar. I am grain, I am born for the warrior. I do not give up the churn, that on legs, the endowments of shepherding. Make up your properties. What can you put against me? Answer me what you can reply, okay? Well, what grain says is, first of all, you don't need to protect me. I can protect myself. There are no animals that want to eat me. Okay? And I'm bountiful. Okay? So I'm independent. You do less work, you get more of me. Okay? That's the argument. And of course, the gods say that grain is better. Even though people who raise sheep and goats, they're stronger, they're more free, they're more independent. But kings don't want that. So they create these stories, these mythologies, in order to brainwash people out of their freedom, out of their independence. Okay? And that's why we have writing. That's why they invented writing. Okay? Does that make sense to you guys?
Yes.
All right, any questions?
So my first question is, like earlier you mentioned that there are three ancient civilizations that are very close to each other, like Egyptian and
That's right. So they, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and so my question is, like, are there any connections between their distance and how they made all of this myth and their methodologies of creating the gods?
Okay, that's a really good question. It's almost impossible for us to answer how much they influence each other, okay? Because even if they were not in contact with each other, they would still come up with the myths that they had come up with in order to justify their hierarchy. Okay, does that make sense? So myth making is just a natural part of the human process. So do they share these stories together? Probably, okay? But what's important to understand is that these elites are also interested in differentiation. So if I'm in Egypt, I need to prove to my people that I'm superior to the people in Mesopotamia and Indus Valley civilization, and that's why I create the pyramids, right? Okay, if I'm in Mesopotamia, I need to prove that I'm superior. That's why I create the Zergods and the Epic of Gilgamesh. All right, so the actual process, it's hard to say. Okay, so another way of thinking of this is, how much are you influenced by American popular culture? Probably a lot, but how much? Okay. Also, whatever influence that you have, you still also refract it for your own personal needs as well. Okay, so that's a great question. And scholars spend a long time, decades, trying to figure out what the actual influence of each culture is on the other culture. And from my perspective, it's not important. We just have to assume that there is influence, that these cultures are in contact with each other, but ultimately, at the end of the day, whatever they come up with has to be unique to their own culture. They want to prove that their culture is superior, and they want to, and they have to address local needs as well. Okay, does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
And I have another question. Is that I don't know how familiar you are with the Chinese culture, but in our Chinese culture, there is a god who created the earth. Like his name is Pangu. Like there is this mythology of how Pangu creates the earth. And so my question is, like, you can notice that in the Chinese culture, Pangu is a male, and he is the one who sacrificed himself in order to create the earth. And in other myths, like in Egyptians, the creator is this female character. So in your opinion, like, do you think there is like what is why is this different between?
Okay. Yeah. So it's hard for us to say what the original myth was. Okay. But the process is this: in the very beginning, all gods should be asexual. Okay. So they're either non-sexual, like it's not male or female, or they are both male and female. Okay. Because in all traditions, the god has to be a balance of forces, right? So the male force and the female force. That's why we have yin and yang. But over time, what will happen is that they will change certain characteristics to reflect better the hierarchy. So maybe in the beginning, when females were in charge, Pangu was a female character. But over time, they'll change it to a male character. All right? It's almost impossible for us to go back and rebuild or reimagine what it was like originally. Okay? Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, any more questions, guys? Okay, great. So I hope this makes sense. And next class, what we're going to do is we will talk about the steppes people, okay? The people in the steppes. This is civilization, so people who do agriculture. But remember that throughout most of human history, the major conquerors were people from the steppes, okay? So Genghis Khan came from the steppes. So we'll be discussing them next class, okay? All right, thank you. Okay, so today we are going to discuss civilization versus the steppes, okay? Civilization versus the steppes. The steppes are the grasslands, and people often refer to them as barbarians, okay? So in China, we refer to these people as like Yamanian, barbarians. And in school, you're taught that there are major differences between civilization and barbarians, right? So the first major difference is that in civilization, you are allowed intellectual freedom. Because only by reading books, only by going to school, only by learning how to think can you be free to think, okay? And in the steppes, we think of them as emotional slaves. They are unpredictable, they are violent, okay? Second thing is that we think of civilization as open and curious. We love knowledge, we seek to gain more knowledge. Therefore, we are innovative, okay? Whereas the steppes people, they are static, okay? Because they are insular, they're close-minded. Okay? And the last thing is that we think civilization leads to wealth and prosperity. Only if you're civilized can you truly be happy, okay? And wealthy. And we think that the steppe people are poor and therefore unhappy. Okay, that is the general understanding of the difference between civilization and the barbarians, okay? The problem is that this creates a misunderstanding. And we can't really explain why is it that throughout human history, the steppe people have been the greatest conquerors. Okay, so the classic example is Genghis Khan. How is it that Genghis Khan was able to not only conquer China, okay, which is considered one of the greatest civilizations in the world, but also Baghdad, another great civilization, okay? But what's interesting is that throughout human history, this has been a consistent pattern where the barbarians conquered the civilized people, okay? So this is a problem. How is it that if in civilization, they're so free, they're so smart, they're so open, they're so curious, innovative, and so prosperous, why is it that they keep on losing out to the steppe people? And the answer is because your traditional understanding is completely wrong, okay? And I will show you that it's actually the opposite. It is the steppe people who are open, curious, and innovative. And it is the civilizing people who are close-minded, who are static, and who are unhappy. Okay? So that's my argument to you today. All right? So let's go over some of my points before I show you the PPT, okay? All right, so let's discuss how civilization starts. So last class, we understand that there's a major river, and on top of this major river, you have a city develop, okay? Remember that we come together for religious purposes. We have settlements in order to celebrate nature, celebrate God, celebrate our religion, our belief system. And over time, what happens is that this system becomes unequal, it becomes hierarchical, and therefore we leave. But there are some places that are strategic for trade purposes, and therefore people don't want to leave because you can generate a lot of wealth and prosperity in these places. And so they become major cities. Okay, so the first city in world civilization is Uruk, okay? And over time, they become more and more prosperous. They build canals. They learn farming. They develop their own mythology, okay? And then what happens is that as the population grows and grows, they go off and colonize other places along the trade route, okay? Maybe upstream and then downstream as well. And then what happens is that these city-states are now in competition with each other. And they have a system of competition called open cooperative competition. Okay? This is a very important concept because this concept is what gives us innovation. So you have these three things in place: open, cooperation, competition, you'll be very innovative. Open just means that you want to learn, you want to grow, you want to learn from others. Cooperation means that you are in contact with others, so that you are learning the best practices from other people. Competition means that you want to be better than they are, okay? So in this system of city-states, you have massive innovation. And we see this throughout human history, okay? So think of China. When was China the most innovative? It was during the Chunqiu, right? The spring-autumn period. That's where we're getting Confucius from. Zhuangzi, okay? All the great ideas came from this period of the Chunqiu, okay? This is also true for Mesopotamia. This is also true for Egypt as well, okay? And eventually what happens is that these city-states all merge into an empire because during this process of innovation, one city will be more innovative than the others, and therefore they will conquer the others. What's interesting often is that it is a city that is most disadvantaged that conquers the other cities because they're forced to be more innovative. So in China, the classic example is the Qing, right? The Qing was in the mountains. They had lower population. They were poorer. They were more isolated. And therefore, they're more innovative than the Zhao, the Chu, the Wei dynasties, okay? And this is true also throughout human history. And so now you have an empire. And at first, this empire is extremely innovative. Why? For 3 reasons, okay? The first thing is that it now has scale. Okay? It has size. Therefore, it's able to draw on more resources. Second is the idea of standardization. Standardization just means that now you're using the same monetary system. You're using the same laws. You're using the same communications network, okay? And that allows for better use of resources. Now, last is the idea of centralization. Meaning that you have one place controlling all activities elsewhere. And that allows you to build canals, that allows you to build temples. That allows you to undertake massive public works projects, okay? So in the beginning of the empire, there's massive consolidation of innovation, which leads to tremendous innovation, okay? But over time, what happens is the empire becomes the opposite of an open, cooperative competition system. Why? Well, first of all, it becomes insular, okay? Then it becomes secretive. And then it becomes a monopoly. That's what a bureaucracy is. Okay, do you guys understand? Okay?
Yeah.
All right? So when an empire reaches a certain point of growth, it becomes a bureaucracy, and therefore it kills all innovation. So this idea that civilization leads to innovation is wrong. Okay? Civilization leads ultimately to corruption. All right? Now, what's interesting is that even though this is a general rule of human development, it's not always true. There are exceptions, okay? So, for example, one civilization that we know that did not work out like this is something called the Indus Valley Civilization, which is modern-day Pakistan. And we'll discuss this later on. But they were actually, even though they had a city-state system, they were actually peaceful, egalitarian, and artistic. Okay? They didn't go to war with each other. They didn't create a hierarchy. They didn't create a bureaucracy. And we'll discuss later on why this is the case. But this is something that you need to understand. Even though there are patterns to human history, there are always exceptions to the rule. Okay? All right. So, over time, the empire breaks down, okay? Why? Because you have a hierarchy in place. Okay, a hierarchy, a bureaucracy. The people are at the bottom. And if you are a person in an empire, your life sucks, okay? It really sucks because you're essentially a slave. Why? Well, first of all, the empire goes to war a lot in order to protect its advantages, okay? So they can, at any time, just take you to war and you get killed, okay? Second is the problem of debt. It's very easy if you are a peasant to fall in debt. You owe rent to a landlord, then you have to sell your children, okay? So debt really sucks. And the last problem is immobility, which just means that you're just stuck where you are, okay? So the people in the empire, their lives suck, but they're stuck where they are because of war, debt, and immobility. And as we discussed last class, the bureaucracy will develop a mythology in order to justify why they are like this. Okay? But at the very top, it's actually even more problematic because what happens is at the top, you will eventually have a problem of elite overproduction. Okay? Elite overproduction just means that there are only a few limited spots for the elite, and the elite have too many children. And therefore, they fight, okay? They break up into different factions. And each faction competes against each other for the right to be the elite. And because of this conflict at the very top, you usually have three results, okay? The first result is revolution, where one elite tells the people to overthrow everyone else, okay? So remember, what's really important to understand is the people do not create the revolution. The people themselves do not rebel. It's always one faction of the elite working with the people to overthrow the other factions, okay? That's what a revolution is. Second possibility is civil war, okay? Where the factions have different armies and they fight. And the third possibility is just they go to war with the empire, okay? But this is a common pattern in history. Now, what's really interesting is that as the empire falls, the pastoral people come and take over the empire, okay? The steppe people, or the pastoralists. Pastoralist just means that they don't farm for a living, they raise sheep, goats, and cows for a living, okay? They come and they take over the empire. Why is this the case? Because these people are the best fighters in the world. They have horses, they're archers, okay? So they're the best fighters in the world. So what often happens is one faction invites them to be mercenaries in the struggle, and eventually they recognize, you know what? We don't have to fight for the prince. We can take over ourselves. Another thing that happens is the faction that invites the mercenaries don't have enough money to pay them off. So the mercenaries are just like, screw this, we'll just take over the empire ourselves, okay? And what's important to understand is that throughout all this, the pastoralists are always in contact with the empire through three things, okay? Through trade, through pillaging. So the pastoralists come and steal from the people, and through being mercenaries, okay? So this is a pattern throughout human history. So now the question we have to ask is, why are the pastoralists so different from people of civilization and empire? And the reason is geography. What I will show you is that people who are pastoralists grow up in a different environment than the people of civilization and empire, and therefore they have developed a different economy, as well as mythology, as well as culture, okay? All right? All right, let's continue. But we're clear so far, right? Okay, so in the beginning, we had agriculture. Why did we have agriculture? Because as we discussed before, people came together for religious purposes. They built temples. And now you have to maintain the temples, therefore you build farms around the temple and you develop agriculture, okay? But because of climate change and overpopulation, people are always constantly forced to move to new places. So agriculture was first up in the Middle East, and then it went over to Europe, and it went over to other places as well. Okay, so it spread around the world. So when they went to Europe, they could actually maintain their agricultural practices because the climate and the geography and the terrain of Europe was conducive to agriculture. And as a result, Europe maintained the cultural practices of the people of the Middle East, okay? And so they had egalitarian, artistic, and peaceful civilizations, okay? So why they were peaceful is that, first of all, women were in control. Okay, remember, it's the most natural thing to have women be part of the political class, okay? So women were in charge. So if there was any conflict, the women would just discuss it amongst themselves and come to a harmonious conclusion, okay? They wouldn't have to fight. Second thing is there was no money because there was no property, okay? The agriculture is something that you work on together and you share. There's no such concept as private property, okay? So in other words, no war, no conflict. So these are the three distinct characteristics of early human society. In an agricultural society, women are usually in command, there's no sense of private property, everyone shares everything together, and there's no conflict and no war. People just discuss things and trade in order to reach a harmonious conclusion, okay? So what this changes is that the city grows and grows, and then you have a large city, and so you need a bureaucracy, okay? But in Europe, what's really important to understand about Europe is that unlike China and Egypt and Mesopotamia, it does not have a large river. And therefore, you cannot grow a big city in Europe. Okay, so that allows them to maintain a pretty good life. Okay, so when they go to Europe, they're able to maintain the same cultural practices, but then they go to the steppes, okay? And the problem with steppes is you cannot grow food because it's all grassland, okay? You cannot farm. So now you have to change your cultural practice. So what was happening is that these people in the steppes, they started to trade with people with agriculture, okay? Also, you have people in the agriculture who moved to the steppes and they brought with them cows and sheep. And this changed everything. Because you, as a person, you can't eat grass, but cows and sheep can. So now what you can do is you can base your entire economy around animals as opposed to agriculture, okay? But there's certain problems with cows and sheep, okay? The first problem is that they're expensive. So now you have a concept of private property, money. And this concept didn't really exist before, okay? And so if I see someone with a cow, I don't have a cow, what do? I want to go steal it, right? So this leads to conflict now, war and conflict. And because you have private property and war and conflict, you can't have a system run by women. You need a system run by men. This creates a patriarchy, okay? So this is a very important principle in human history. These three things go together, okay? Patriarchy, money, and war. Okay? These three things always go together. Patriarchy, money, and war. Okay. So this is changing the economy of the steppes, and it's becoming different from agricultural societies, okay? And so now they need innovations in order to deal with the new economy. Okay? So let's go over some of their major innovations. The first major innovation that's very important is the idea of lactose tolerance. You may not know this, but most humans cannot drink milk naturally. Okay? So you need to develop the enzymes to drink milk naturally. And so they were able to do that because they were forced to rely on cows and sheep for their food. They had to learn how to drink milk. But when they learned how to drink milk, when they learned how to eat, when they started eating meat, guess what? They became stronger and taller, okay? So for most of human history, the people of the steppes were the tallest people in the world. They were the strongest in the world, okay? That's the first major innovation that changed their history. The second major innovation is horse riding. Why? Because the steppes are a huge area and it's flat. So you need to move around it a lot. Also remember, cows and sheep eat grass. So when they eat this in this pasture and they finish all their grass, they have to move somewhere else, okay? So the only way to protect your cows and sheep from other people is to be mobile. And so they learn how to domesticate horses, okay? Which is a major innovation and it took a long time. And you can imagine how hard that is to do because if horses see you, what do? They run away. So how do you train a horse to not run away and let the horse ride you? Well, it takes a lot of effort. But because they had to do it, they managed to do it, okay? And so with the horse riding, now you can have another invention, which is the wheel and the wagon. Wheel and wagon. Now you can put all your stuff in a wagon and move from camp to camp. Okay? You can cover the entirety of the steppes. Okay? Does that make sense? Yes. Okay? And because of these three major innovations, you now have a different culture. Okay? So let's go over what makes their culture distinctive from other places. Okay? The first is the idea of patriarchy. where men are in control. And the reason why they're in control is because in the steppes, war is a constant thing, okay? So the culture becomes very masculine, very aggressive. It rewards aggression. It rewards courage, okay? The other thing is that when you have a patriarchy in place, you can have more children, okay? When women are in charge, women tend to practice birth control because they want to make sure that every child is healthy and every child lives to adulthood, okay? They want to avoid the risk of dying in childbirth. They want to avoid the risk of their child dying young, okay? But with men in charge, they basically get women to have as many kids as possible, okay? Also remember, like, in this world, there's a lot of conflict, so you need as many boys to fight as possible, okay? But then you have a problem then. If you have a lot of children, you have a problem of inheritance. Like when you die, your cows go to who, right? Now let's assume you have 100 cows. You have like 10 boys. If you are fair and you give 10 cows to one boy, well, very quickly, your family is going to be poor. And because in the steppes, the weather is bad, your cows are very likely to die, well, then your entire family could be extinct in 2 or 3 generations. So they invented a new concept called primogeniture. Primogeniture. Primogeniture just means that the eldest boy inherits everything. That ensures that the family can stay wealthy. Okay? All right? But now your problem is, wait a minute, if the eldest boy inherits everything, what do the other boys do? Well, they have to go and steal other cows, okay? And to do that, they form secret societies. Okay? Secret societies are just like, basically just gangs, okay? These gangs of young men who get together to do what? Well, they go steal cows and sheep, and what else do? They steal women, right? Because, right? I mean, like, what's the most valuable commodity in the steppes? Well, cows and women. So that's what you steal, okay? So this creates a culture of war and conflict constantly, all right? And the third innovation is something called the patron-client relationship. And this is actually or patronage. And this is what allows for the construction of society in the steppes. So remember, in a civilization, you have bureaucracy, you have centralization. But in the steppes, you can't have that because you can't have that many people. So you have a patron-client relationship. And all that means is that it's like the mafia, right? I'm the big brother, you're the little brother. So maybe I have 100 cows and you need cows. So I lend you 10 cows. But now you are loyal to me, okay? I'm the big brother, you're the little brother. And this creates the idea of tribes. Okay, does that make sense? What's really important here is that in civilization, bureaucracy maintains control over people over debt until you become a slave. But in the steppes, there's no concept of slavery. Okay? You're still a free, independent person, but you're just loyal to your big brother. So if your big brother needs you to do something, you go do it for him, okay? So there's still a level of freedom in the steppes that you don't have in civilization. And that's why they're such good fighters. Okay? All right? So these 3 things are major innovations. Okay? But now that you have these innovations, you need a new methodology to justify or explain these innovations. Okay? And so what they had was, they went from the mother goddess. Okay, so mother goddess again is the religion of agricultural people, to the sky god. And the mother goddess wants you to be harmonious, okay? To be kind and compassionate. What does the sky god want you to do? The sky god wants you to conquer and exploit, okay? It wants you to destroy. It wants you to kill. It wants you to conquer, to steal. Okay? And also in this religion, horses and cows are very important. But as we discussed last class, here grain in nature are very important. Okay? So you see how this works, right? Okay. Now, what's important to understand is that because this system does not allow for the creation of a bureaucracy, the steps always practice open, cooperative competition. And it's a system that forces you to be aggressive. It forces you to be independent, okay? And it forces you to work hard. And that's why people of the steppes are the greatest warriors in human history. And that's why when the steppes people encounter the empire civilization, they usually are able to conquer the empire, okay? Does that make sense? Okay? So the steppes are like a training ground for fighters. And over time, the fighters just become more and more fierce. And what's ironic is those fighters who are the most fierce can stay in the steppes. Those fighters who are forced out of the steppes, they go conquer the empire. Okay? All right? It's a constant pattern in human history. All right. Is that clear? All right. Any questions, guys, before I do the PPT? Great. Okay, guys. Yes? So, sorry, can you speak to the mic, please?
So earlier you said that these people, they inherit their to their oldest son, right? So my question is like, is it like necessary for or so they must inherit their inheritance to the oldest son, or is it like they have some kind of a system to determine which son can have the best of their inheritance?
Okay, yeah, so their general principle is always the eldest son, okay? That's to avoid conflict. Because if you open up to say, okay, well, whoever is most brave, whoever is most noble, whoever who's most wise, that means that they'll just fight each other, okay? And this is what happened after the death of Genghis Khan, right? So the general rule is you always give it to the eldest son.
But what if the eldest son has been manipulated by his siblings?
It doesn't matter. It does not matter, okay? All right. All right, so legacy of the steppes. All right, so as I discussed, what's happening is that Europe at first was just hunter-gatherer, okay? And they were spread out. They did paintings in caves. They had a pretty easy life, okay? Not an easy life, but it was a free life. And over time, what would happen is that agriculture would develop in the Middle East, and it would spread to Europe, okay? And you can see the genetic change where the blue is hunter-gatherer and the orange is farmers, okay? But then what would happen in about 2500 BCE is the steppes people, who we call the Yamnaya actually. So different names, they're Proto-Indo-Europeans, the Yamnaya, you can refer to them as any, okay? Steppes, Yamnaya, Proto-Indo-European, it doesn't really matter. But they go to Europe as well, and they start mixing with the farmers. What's really important for our purpose to understand is this. When the farmers went to Europe, they went as families, husband, wife, children. And so they integrated into Europe pretty peacefully, okay? But when the pastoralists, the Yamnaya, went to Europe, they went mostly as young men. Therefore, that they kill the local man in order to marry their wives, okay? And so basically, from DNA research, we know that it was a genocide, okay? The European farming men were eliminated by the pastoralists, okay? And we have to always remember that the pastoralists, they were stronger, okay? They were taller, and they were more aggressive, okay? All right. Yeah, so this is another map that shows the same thing. What you need to understand is this. This movement is global, okay? So the farmers went to Europe, but they also went to India and Iran, okay? They basically went wherever they could go. Same thing with the Yamnaya, okay? So this is the Yamnaya people. They went to Europe, but they also, look at this, they also went to Iran and India. And we know because when we study the languages, Persian, okay, Hindi, and European languages, they're basically the same languages. So we know there had to be one common mother language to them. Okay, so there's another map showing you the Yamnaya. Again, they went to Europe, but they also went to India, okay, as well as Iran. And by mixing with local customs and religion, they created new religions that had a tremendous impact on world civilization. So in Iran, they will give birth to Zoroastrianism, which we will discuss later on, okay? And these are the Avestas, which is the Bible of Zoroastrianism. In India, they, of course, gave birth to Hinduism. And these are the Vedas, which is the Bible of Hinduism. We'll discuss this later on in the semester, but I want you to be aware of this, okay? So again, we know that this happened at first because of linguistic studies. When we looked at different languages, we discovered there are common words to them. So let's look at father, okay? When Latin is pater, Greek patris, Persian padar, Hindi pita. Pretty similar, okay? Similar with mother. Mother, matar, mitara, madar, mat. So from different linguistic studies, we know there had to be a common language to all of them. And that's why we hypothesize about the Proto-Indo-Europeans. This is an even more stark example where the Proto-Indo-European 2 is Dua, okay? And you can see how it spreads to other languages in the Proto-Indo-European family, so that you go from Dua to Twa to Tu in English, okay? So all these languages are interrelated. That's why if you speak one, like English, it's pretty easy for you to learn the other languages as well. Whereas if you speak Chinese, it doesn't really help you when you go learn other languages, okay? All right, now, linguists have done studies of words that are distinct to Proto-Indo-European. And these are the words that they discovered, okay? Bull, cow, ox, ram, eel, dog, grain, cauldron, wrestling, wealth, households, families, clans. These words are unique to their culture. And therefore, we're able to group these words together and discover there are 4 characteristics, okay? First of all, they have lots of words for wheel. They have words for dairy. They don't have farming terms, and they have words for horse, okay? That's why we're able to figure out that these are nomadic pastoralists. Therefore, they must be from the steppes, okay? And then through archaeology and DNA studies, we're able to have a better understanding of who they are. Okay, and as I said, they have to be pastoralists, okay? Because of the way they use words. So let's talk about old Europe before the Yamnaya come and conquer them. Okay, so this is Maria Gimbutas, who is an American Lithuanian anthropologist. And she's the first to hypothesize that old Europe must have been conquered by these people, because she did a lot of archaeology and discovered that their culture was primarily peaceful, it honored women, and it espoused egalitarianism, okay? This is exactly what I said previously. And the Yamnaya people were completely different. They were a patriarchy who had private property, and which was very aggressive, okay? She wrote many books, The Language of the Goddess, and her work is amazing, okay? So if you have a chance, please do study her work. And so let's read what she wrote, okay? So this is the mother goddess civilization, something that we thought we'd discuss a lot in this class. The goddess in all her manifestations was a symbol of the unity of all life in nature. Her power was in water and stone, in tomb, in cave, in animals, and birds, snakes, and fish, hills, trees, and flowers. Hence the holistic and mythopoeic perception of all the sacredness and mystery of all there is on earth. Okay? So again, this is a religion that practices balance and harmony because everything is sacred. Therefore, you cannot destroy life without first getting permission from the mother goddess. Okay? This culture took deep delight in the natural wonders of this world. Its people did not produce lethal weapons or build forts in inaccessible places as their successors did, even when they were acquainted with metallurgy. Instead, they built magnificent tombs, shrines, and temples comfortable house in moderately sized villages and created superb pottery and sculptures. This was a long-lasting period of remarkable creativity and stability, an age free of strife. Their culture was a culture of art. Okay, so this is a very nice place. They don't fight, they're egalitarian, they practice art. Okay, and what's really important for us to understand is they had writing systems, they had technology. They just chose not to use it for war because it was against their religion. So they also had writing systems and they had symbols, okay? And this is something that Maria Gumbutas has done a lot of research in, okay? I won't go into their writing system. So when the Yanai came, they basically completely invert the culture. So for example, the old Europeans believed that the snake was a symbol of life energy and regeneration, a most benevolent, not evil creature. It was the Yanai who introduced the idea that the snake is a devil, okay? All right, and that's where we get the concept in the Bible from. Black to them is a good color. White is a bad color. White because black symbolizes life. White symbolizes death, right? Black did not mean death or the underworld. It was the color of fertility, the color of damp caves and rich soil of the womb of the goddess where life begins. White, on the other hand, was the color of death of bones, okay? And again, when the Yanai come, they will invert this. What's really important to understand is, in this society, women are in control of their power and agency. And why? Well, it turns out that this book, Sex at Dawn, okay? It turns out that women are just better at managing social relationships than men are, okay? So this is Sex at Dawn by Christopher Ryan. And he tries to show us that for most of human history, women had sexual agency. And one piece of evidence is the fact that human men have larger penises. In fact, the largest penises of all primates, okay? So gorillas are much bigger than we are. We have bigger penises. Why? Because we have to compete in order to put our semen into women, right? Because women have multiple sexual partners. And so that's one major advantage of sexual freedom for women. Men have bigger penises, okay? All right. Even when women had long-term intimate partners, husbands, they had sexual partners, okay? So the idea is that for most of human history, love and sex were not the same thing. Love is intimacy. Sex is just fun, okay? In some societies, women would have many husbands, usually brothers, okay? And that's a way to maintain peace and harmony in your society, okay? If a woman is allowed to marry many brothers together. Okay? All right. So the book looks at the Melanesian people where they practice sexual freedom for women. And the explanation is that semen was essential to human growth and development, okay? So if a bride got married, then all the men would come and impregnate her because the idea is that semen is sacred and they want to give her as much life as possible, okay? All right, now you may be disgusted by this, okay? But I think there's a very good counter-argument, okay? So the argument is that it's not honorable for a woman to love anyone except her husband, and that this evil being among them, he himself was not sure that his son who was there present was his son, okay? So the system sucks because if you're a guy, how do you know that that person is your son? And the natives respond by saying, you French people, okay, so he's talking about the French missionary, you French people love only your own children, but we all love all the children of our tribe, okay? So that's what humans can do. We can love each other. There's no limit to our love. So in the system that we have today, a patriarchy, we only love our own children. But in their system, the ancient system, everyone loved each other's children, okay? Everyone loved all children. And quite honestly, in this system, it's better to be a child, right? And in this system, you would never, ever develop depression, okay? All right. Again, women are just better politicians than men because women are more willing to cooperate, women have more emotional intelligence, and women can use sex and gossip as mechanisms of control, okay? So this is all pretty common sense, right? All right, but the question then is, if this world is so wonderful, why did it collapse? Well, there are three major issues with agricultural societies, okay? The first major issue is that it's static. It does not innovate. Second major issue is climate change. If the weather changes on you, you're screwed. And the third problem is disease, right? Because you're living close to animals. You're living close together. So if a disease hits you, you're all screwed, okay? And that's very different from the steppes people who live far apart from each other, okay? All right. So we know that in Europe, the farmer communities, the population went collapse, okay? So this is the level of carbon dioxide in the air. We can measure the level of carbon dioxide in the air. We know that about the year 3000 BCE, the population collapsed, okay? All right, it collapsed everywhere in Europe. Why does this happen? The plague, guys, okay? That's a problem with being a farmer. You are always susceptible to the plague. So we know that maybe, 4,000, 5,000 years ago, a plague broke out, okay? The Black Death, basically, by rats, okay? And remember, in this world, we trade with each other. So the Black Death was able to go everywhere and wipe out farming communities, okay? Even spread as far as China, okay? But the thing, though, is the steppes people are not as impacted because they live far apart from each other. So if one got the disease, you're not going to spread it to your entire family, your entire community. Whereas a farming community, they will, okay? So there's this huge drop in the population because of Black Death in Europe, okay? That's number one. Number two is climate change. So we know that now and then there's this huge climate change, and that destroys agriculture, forcing people to migrate. And this is what we suspect happened in old Europe as well, okay? And so what's happening now is that because your society is static, because of disease, because of climate change, the population in Europe went all the way down, leaving the opportunity to come invade, okay? And they did come invade. So as you can see, when the agricultural people came, they came as families, okay? So the blue is the man, the red is the woman, okay? So 1 to 1, they go into Europe. But when the Yamnaya come, they come as young men, okay? So it's mainly blue, okay? And of course, what do young men do? They come and they steal your woman, okay? That's what young men do, guys. All right, and over time, what they will do is slowly establish new cultures, because what's happening is that their culture is blending with other cultures as well. And why this is happening is the geography is different, right? So in the steppes, they have a certain culture, but when they move to agriculture, they now have to combine their culture with the local ones. And this happens everywhere, producing different cultures and producing different languages as well. Okay, so all of Europe was radically transformed because of this migration. And again, this migration, it was basically a genocide. So you look at Britain, okay? The people who built Stonehenge are gone. This is a farming, agricultural community who worship the mother goddess, okay? And they had all this wonderful science and technology that's now lost to us, because what would happen is the Yamnaya would come and kill everyone, okay? So the blue is the farmer people, the red is Yamnaya. Total genocide, okay, guys? Men and women were all killed. Why? Because maybe the men and women chose to fight together, okay? In Spain, it's a different story, because what happened is that all the men would be replaced, okay? So the Y chromosome is the male chromosome. So before the year 2000 BCE, you had a lot of blue, right? But as you can see, if you move further, it's all gone. They killed all the men in Spain, okay? When they went to India, it's a different story, because Indians in that time were more peaceful. So they came to a settlement where the new conquerors would be at the top of society, and the locals would be at the bottom, okay? So there wasn't that much of a genocide, but we had a caste system created because of that, okay? And we know because if you look at the upper caste, they all spoke Indo-European. If you look at the lower caste people, they spoke the local language, Dravidian. Okay? Does that make sense? So depending on the circumstance, the result is different. All right? Okay, this is a wonderful book called The Horse, the Wheel, and Language, written by David Anthony, who's a Harvard anthropologist. And he explains to us the Yamnaya culture and why they were so dominant, okay? So one thing that is unique to the Yamnaya is their mythology. It's a mythology of violence, of struggle, of dominance, of conquest, okay? And how the mythology works is, in the beginning, there were two brothers, twins. One named Man and the other named Twin. They go around by the world and they're accompanied by a great cow. Eventually, Man and Twin decide to create the world we now inhabit. To do this, Man had to sacrifice Twin, okay? He had to kill his own brother, the person he loved, in order to create the world. And the gods thanked him for that. The gods blessed him for that. Okay, so this is a world that is pretty violent, okay? After the world was made, the sky gods gave cattle to third man, but the cattle were stolen by a three-headed, six-eyed serpent, okay? The snake. Third man entreated the storm god to help get the cattle back. Together they went to the cattle of the monsters, killed it, and freed the cattle, okay? So this is a mythology of struggle, okay? And what's really interesting is that this mythology becomes the mythology of all new Proto-Indo-European civilizations, including the Romans and the Mongolians, okay? So this is Genghis Khan. His mythology is what? He kills his best friend to become the leader of the Mongol people. And what's the Roman mythology? Romulus kills his twin brother to found Rome, okay? All right? So that shows you that the Mongols and the Romans, they come from the same culture, okay? A culture based on violence and exploitation. All right, so now Anthony talks about the economy. Domesticated cattle and sheep started a revolutionary change in how humans exploited the Pontic Caspian steppe environment. Because cattle and sheep were cultured like humans, they were part of everyday work and worry in a way never approached by wild animals. Humans identify with their cattle and sheep, wrote poetry about them, and used them as currency in marriage gifts, debt payments, and the calculation of social status, okay? Now we have the beginning of money and property, right? And they were grass processors. They converted plains of grass, useless and even hostile to humans, into wool, fed, clothing, tents, milk, yogurt, cheese, meat, marrow, and bone, the foundation of both life and wealth. Cattle and sheep herds can grow rapidly with a little luck, vulnerable to bad weather and theft. They can also decline rapidly. Herding was a volatile, boom-bust economy and required a flexible, opportunistic social organization. So they lived in a world of tremendous volatility because the entire world was their cattle. If the cattle died because of a bad storm or because of bad luck, they were completely screwed. Okay, so they were a very aggressive people and they were opportunistic as well. Okay? That's different from farmers who can just afford to sit back and relax because nature will grow the food for them. Okay. The connection between animals, brothers, and power was a foundation on which new forms of male-centered ritual and politics developed among Indo-European speaking societies. This is why the cow and brothers occupied such a central place in Indo-European myths relating to how the world began, okay? So this is a deeply patriarchal society. All right? All right. Participation in long-distance trade, gift exchange, and a new set of cults requiring public sacrifices and feasting became the foundation for a new kind of social power. Stock breeding is by nature a volatile economy. Herders who lose animals always borrow from those who still have them. The social obligations associated with these loans are institutionalized among the world's pastoralists as a basis for a fluid system of status distinctions. Those who loan animals acquired power over those who borrow them, and those who sponsored fees obligate their guests. Early Proto-Indo-European included a vocabulary about verbal contracts bound by oaths used in later religious rituals to specify the obligations between the weak and the strong, okay? All right, so the idea here is there's no slavery in the system, okay? But there is obligation, there's loyalty. If I take you out for a meal, guess what? Now you owe me a meal. If I take you out for a meal, I'm now your big brother, okay? And that's what keeps the society cohesive. And this is important because if no one's a slave and everyone's free, then everyone is a great warrior because you're fighting for yourself. Okay? You're not fighting because someone asked you to. And that's why in wars between empires and these people usually win. Okay? Because they're much more motivated. All right. Wealth, military power, and a more productive herding system probably brought prestige and power to the identities associated with Proto-Indo-European dialects after 33 BCE. The guest host institution extended the protections of oath-bound obligations to new social groups, and Indo-European speaking patron could accept and integrate outsiders as clients without shaming them or assigning them permanently to submissive roles as long as they conducted the sacrifices properly. Praise poetry at public feasts encouraged patrons to be generous and validated the language of the songs as a vehicle for communication with the gods who regulated everything, okay? So another way of saying this is that even though there are wealthy people and poor people, they are still treated with respect, okay? It's a very egalitarian society, okay? And what keeps the system in place is their belief in the gods, okay? The belief that if I do you a favor, then you owe me a favor. We have a contract now. And the gods oversee the contracts. And what's really important is that this is an open-ended system, so it's easy for me to bring in more people into this system. Okay? Okay, and that's why, again, they were such an innovative, cohesive, and open society. Okay, the last thing we'll talk about are these young men who enter secret societies. Okay, and they enter secret societies and become, like this mafia gangs. Okay, the institution of the Moribund, the warrior brotherhood of young men bound by oath to one another and to their ancestors during a ritually mandated raid, has been reconstructed as a central part of Proto-Indo-European initiation rituals. Okay, it's a very important part of society because these young men otherwise have no place to go. Okay, and if you want to know who they are, they're basically the Vikings. Okay, so the Vikings are the direct descendants of these people. Okay. All right. So let's talk about the Mongols. The Mongols conquered the world, most of the world, and the question is, how did they do it? Okay, and I've already told the answer. Okay, because the steppe people have always been good at conquering empires. These are the Mongols. The secret weapon, of course, is a horse archer. This is like the ultimate weapon for most of human history. You could not defend against a horse archer. They were fast, they were strong, and these were the best warriors in the world. So this has been a consistent pattern in human history. First, the Yamnai came and conquered Europe, India, and Iran. But then you had the Scythians, okay? Same place, same people, same culture. Guys, this is not a race of people. This is a culture of people, okay? Because remember, at this time in human history, genetic exchange is very common, okay? The Scythians were dominant. Then you have the Medians, who would later on give rise to the Persian Empire, okay? Sorry. Oops. Okay, sorry. Okay, then you had, sorry, can you see this? Okay, so now what's gonna happen is this. So the steppes people are all around the grassland. Now China emerges as an empire, okay? And this is the Han Empire. And this is really the last Chinese dynasty. Why? Because they are ethnically Chinese. And they're proud of who they are. So what they're gonna do is they're going to try to destroy the steppes people once and for all, okay? So they move a huge army into the steppes to try to limit the threat. And what happens now is it forces a cascade effect where these people are now forced to go westwards, which forces them to conflict with people over here, okay? And so you have this huge migration all the way to the Roman Empire, okay? Okay, so this is what the map shows us, okay? China forces the Huns, the Shunnu, westwards, which then forces these other groups to go elsewhere, okay? So again, the strongest people stay in the steppes. The weakest people go and conquer empires. Okay? This is a process of constant innovation. The Han Empire, okay? Attila Han. Then you have the Turks emerge. This is the Mongol Empire, and as you can see, they conquer basically most of the world. Okay? And because they conquer most of the world, and the world is unified, then you have the Black Death, okay, which wipes out most of Europe as well. About a third of Europe is wiped out in the Black Death, okay? And the last great conqueror is Timberlane, okay? Timber the Lane, the last great conqueror from the steppes, and he conquers most of the world, okay? So this is a really important principle to remember. The steppes people are the most innovative, the most open, the most aggressive, the most courageous. And that's why they're the greatest conquerors in history. Okay? But eventually what happens is we develop gunpowder, okay? And now the steppes will be conquered by civilization. But this was the turning point in history, the invention of gunpowder. And so now what's going to happen is that civilization will now attack the steppe people and reduce the steppe people culture. Okay? And that is it. All right? Okay, any questions, guys?
So I was wondering, like, so the barbarians, the steppes, are they capable of developing religions? Like, because they're all conquering all around the world, so it's difficult for them to like build up temples, right?
Okay, so religions don't require temples. Religion is just collective belief. So as I keep on saying in this class, all humans have a religion. Okay, a religion is just a worldview, understanding of how the world works. That answers 3 questions. Where do we come from? Why are we here? Where are we going? Okay, even today, even though we're atheists, we're still religious. Okay, but we worship money, materialism, science. So these people, the steppes, they worship the horse, the sky god, the cow. They worship war. They worship courage and bravery, okay? So every culture, every person has a religion of some sorts because it's impossible for you to understand the world and operate in the world without a religion, okay? Especially for groups. Okay, any more questions? Okay, great, guys. So we'll continue our discussion of human history next class, okay? Okay, so let's start class. Today we are doing the Bronze Age collapse. So let's review where we are in history, okay? So remember, the 4 early civilizations are Egypt, Mesopotamia, Indus Valley, and of course, China. And as we discussed, the reason why they are the first 4 major civilizations is that they have major rivers that allow them to develop agriculture as well as trade overseas. And as we discussed, what will happen is that they will have a major city, and this major city will have colonies along the major river, okay? So in Egypt, it's the Nile. In Mesopotamia, it is the Euphrates and the Tigris. And the first city is Uruk. China, it's the Yellow River, right? So Indus Valley is the Indus Valley. It's the Indus River. And now these different city-states will go to war in order to control trade routes. And this leads to a time of major innovation in human history. At the same time, because of these wars, they need better and better equipment. And so eventually they will develop bronze. Okay, bronze. Bronze, as you know, is an alloy of tin and copper. So you need both in order to create bronze, which is the strongest metal. It's ideal for shields, for armor, and for swords. And whoever has more bronze weaponry will win any war. The problem, though, is that tin, it's actually hard to mine and to discover and to excavate and to manufacture. In fact, tin deposits are scattered all around the world, okay? So this is tin over here, over here, over here, and over here, over here, okay? They're everywhere, basically, but it's not concentrated. Therefore, you must now build more trade routes in order to access tin, okay? So what's going to happen now is that more trade routes will develop in order to access tin. And the major points, the major trade routes will become cities themselves, okay? All right? And now this world is globalized in order to facilitate warfare. Now, what's interesting is the Indus Valley itself, it's not like Egypt, Mesopotamia, and China. It is not engaged in warfare. We've done archaeology in the Indus Valley, in modern-day Pakistan. We have not discovered weaponry, okay? We've discovered bronze, but we have not discovered weaponry. In fact, we believe that Indus Valley, it is a peaceful, egalitarian, and artistic civilization. But it's still brought into this global system. Why? Because bronze changes from weaponry into status. Okay? Meaning people use it for pottery, for jewelry. And then eventually what happens is that bronze itself becomes capital. All right? Now, what we also know is that this world is heavily globalized. There's a lot of trading, and this world is complete, meaning it touches every corner of the world. But starting in about the year 1200, this system collapses. In fact, the collapse is sudden and devastating. So remember, if you know Chinese history, you will know that this is the Shan dynasty, right? Guess what, guys? About the year 1200, it collapses. All right? And we know this because Egypt is under attack during this time by the Sea Peoples. And what we believe is that the Sea Peoples are actually refugees who are fleeing the destruction of Europe. And what we believe is that there's a perfect storm engulfing this world at this time. Okay? So this perfect storm includes climate change. Climate change leads to drought, which leads to famine, which leads to a migration crisis. What's going to happen is that the Sea Peoples are going to come in from the north, and they are going to wipe out existing civilizations, including Mycenaean Greece and the Hittite Empire, okay? The Hittite Empire, which is in Anatolia, which is in modern-day Turkey. Why Mycenaean Greece and the Hittite Empire are important is we believe they are the two major antagonists in the Trojan War. You may have heard of the Trojan War. Well, guess where? Guess what? Troy is here, okay? So Troy is in the center of global trade, and that's why people fight over the location of the city. So the Mycenaean Greece is being destroyed, the Hittite Empire is being destroyed, and Egypt is being under attack. Egypt will survive the invasions of the Sea Peoples, but after the invasions, Egypt will be exhausted and it will lose its global power status, okay? Indus Valley will be itself overwhelmed because of refugees fleeing in from the steppes, okay? Mesopotamia, it's very interesting about Mesopotamia, but it's actually the most resilient of all the four major civilizations. And the reason why is Mesopotamia, throughout its history, is constantly at war, okay? So Egypt is protected by natural geography, by the desert, the Sahara Desert, and then by the Red Sea, okay? So Egypt has natural boundaries. China also has natural boundaries. But Mesopotamia does not. It's a flat land. So it's very easy for the mountain people to come invade, and it's very easy for outsiders to come and build new empires. In fact, throughout Mesopotamian history, there have been three major empires: the Akkadian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, and the Assyrian Empire. And it goes back and forth. And these empires are not, they don't really last that long, maybe a couple hundred years at most, because this area is so competitive. But because it's so competitive, it's actually much more resilient than the other areas, okay? All right, so again, the big question for us is, why would this world collapse like this all of a sudden? And it's really relevant for us to understand because many scholars have compared the Bronze Age world to our world, because our world is also one that is heavily globalized, and it seems like it's on the verge of collapse. So why is it that this sort of like globalized world, in which many countries are getting very wealthy, why do they collapse all of a sudden? Okay? And the argument I will make to you today is it has to do with the nature of capital. Okay? So what I will show you is that this is a proto-capitalistic system. And what we know about proto-capitalism is that it allows for rapid growth, but then it also allows for rapid collapse. Okay? So let's go over the idea of capital. What is capital? Okay, so capital has three major characteristics, okay? The first is that it is universal. Universal just means that everyone wants it. Everyone in the world believes it has value. Okay? That's number one. Number two is that it is a store of value. And what this means is that you're able to take wealth and store it inside this commodity. Okay? And the third thing about capital that's very important is its mobility. Okay? Mobility. Meaning I can take this thing and then transport to somewhere else at little or no cost. If it has these three characteristics, then it is capital. Okay? And throughout human history, there have been different types of capital. So let's look over some examples. So one example is grain, right? Just food. Grain is sort of universal because everyone wants to eat, but not everyone thinks it's valuable. Okay? And it's hard to store value in grain because it could decompose easily. Right? And it's actually hard to transport grain because it's cheap, but it's expensive to transport, okay? And that's why grain never became capital. Now, let's look at cattle. Cattle, like cows and sheep, it's a better form of capital because you can store more value, and it could be universal, but it's actually hard to transport. And that's why cattle never became capital, okay? Now, if you keep on moving on, you get into slaves, right? Human beings. And so you can have women slaves, sex slaves, you can also have man labor, okay? And this is a better form of capital because it's sort of universal, okay? You can store value in it, but the value is uncertain or unstable. And it's mobile, okay? So slaves became an economy, but this is a very basic economy. Then you develop bronze, okay? And bronze now is extremely valuable, okay? Everyone wants it. So it's universal. You can store a lot of value in it because it's hard to make, and now you can move it around, okay? So in other words, bronze became the first real universal currency in the world. And this allowed for rapid globalization in the world. So think of the equivalent of bronze today is, of course, the US dollar, right? The US dollar is universal. Everyone wants it. It's a store of value, and it's mobile as well. And so it's a US dollar which allows for the rapid growth of capitalism around the world, okay? Now, let's discuss how capital works. All right, so what we know is that we humans are actually composed of two natures. We are composed of an altruistic nature, and we are composed of a utilitarian nature, okay? Altruistic just means that you care about human relationships. You want to be nice to people because you want to be their friends, they're part of your family, okay? Utilitarian just means that you don't care about others, you just care about the goal, the profit, money, power, okay? And we're composed of both sides. So think about when you go to a restaurant, right? If the meal is good, you pay a lot of money for it and you give the waitress a tip. When you go home to dinner and your mother is happy to see you, your mother cooks you a really nice meal and then you say, thank you, right? You don't want to do the opposite, right? Where you go to a restaurant and you're like, thank you, and then you leave. And you don't want to go to your mother's house and like say to your mother, hey, this meal was fantastic. Here's $1,000 for you, okay? It would screw everything up, okay? So we have two different natures and we keep them separate. What capital does, that's very interesting, is that it moves us from the altruistic state into the utilitarian state. And at first, that's good. Why? Because when you're altruistic, you don't really want to do anything, okay? Because you don't want to offend other people. So there are lots of villages in the world, and they're static. Why? Because for them, what matters is not change. What matters is harmony. And these villages, it kind of sucks to be an outsider. It kind of sucks to stand out. In fact, there are some traditions in which if you're outspoken, if you are thoughtful, if you like to explore, if you're curious, they will kill you and make you a sacrifice to the gods because they see you as a threat to their social system. Okay, so an altruistic system, it doesn't like change. So if you don't do anything to it, it just stays the way it is. So when you bring capital, people now are more motivated to work hard. People are more motivated to innovate and to explore. So at first this is good, okay? Now you're expanding the system. And then you reach a point of its maximum growth. But then what happens is the scale tips over, okay? And people become too utilitarian. And when you become too utilitarian, you cheat. You don't care about others. And this causes a lot of problems, okay? You start to exploit other people. And so when you become too utilitarian, the system collapses. Okay? Does that make sense? Capital comes in the system and it makes it grow really fast. Once it hits a certain point, then it has to collapse. Okay? So let's use another example. Let's just say that you are a leader of a group of people, and it could be a village, it could be anywhere, okay? And if there's no money involved, what do you care about? You care about status. You care about your reputation. You care about how other people see and perceive you, right? So you care about the feelings of others. Once capital enters the equation, then the way that the leader sees you is different. The leader sees you as a commodity to be exploited. Okay? The leader is now like, how much money can I make money off you? Not only that, but the leader, okay? The leader will do what? The leader will align with other leaders, and they will become a cartel, okay, or an elite. And they will together exploit people, okay? But not only that, but they will expand and look for new areas to conquer, okay? Because all they care about now is money, how to expand the capital. But once the capital expands too far, then what happens is only a few people have all the capital. And the people down below, they're enslaved, they're exploited, and they want to destroy the system. They become indifferent. If you force them, they will revolt against you. So the system must collapse, okay? So the argument I'm trying to make to you is, this is just the way capital works, and there's nothing you can do about it. Okay, that's why the Bronze Age grew, but that's also why the Bronze Age collapsed. And that's why our world grew, but this is also why our world will collapse as well, okay? That's the argument I'm making to you today. Any questions before we go to the PPT? Is this clear to you guys? All right, let's go to the PPT. All right, so this is a map that shows you the world of the Bronze Age. And as we discussed, these are the four major civilizations, right? China, Indus Valley, Mesopotamia, and Egypt, okay? And they now, because they're at war, they have an insatiable need for bronze. And bronze needs tin. Where's tin located? Tin is located where the stars are, okay? And you can see they're scattered over the place. So what they're going to do now is they're going to build trade routes into these tin places that will allow them to extract the tin to create bronze armor, okay? But when they do so, they will also create new civilizations and new cities until you get a completely globalized world. So this is China, and as you can see, they're always at war, and so they need weapons, okay? This is pottery, bronze pottery from China during the Shang dynasty, during the Bronze Age. All right, so how do we know that it's a completely globalized world? Because over the past 200 years, we've discovered shipwrecks. Okay, so we've discovered ships that were transporting goods during the Bronze Age. And so when you dig up these ships and you analyze where the products are from, you're able to rebuild the trade networks, okay? And that's why we know about the Bronze Age. Okay, so what's gonna happen is this. The green is the copper sources, okay? And as you can see, there's a lot of copper sources. The problem is the tin sources are spread out. So in order to create bronze, you need to constantly expand your trade networks outside, okay? And as you can see, what's happening is that the expansion keeps on going until it encompasses the entire world. So the dark brown is the earliest trade routes, and then the pink are the later trade routes. But as you can see, it's always expanding outwards in order to facilitate more and more trade. And what's really important for us to understand is the entire world is encompassed, okay? So this is Britain, this is Ireland, this is Scandinavia. Okay, this is important because if you study history, it's the British Isles, Scandinavia aren't often discussed during in the Bronze Age, but recent research has shown us that it's all interconnected, okay? Okay, so as I mentioned, these are trade networks, okay? And these gray spots are areas that are major nodes in the trade network. They come about because of trade. The red are the major consumption areas, okay? So the gray are areas that are being created in order to better facilitate trade. And eventually, you reach a point when it's completely globalized, when every source of copper and tin has been discovered, and there's a massive trade network built around each area, okay? All right, but again, as we know, even though this area is extremely globalized, extremely wealthy, only in about 50 years, it completely collapses, okay? And we know because of the Egyptian records, okay? The Egyptians write about becoming the sea peoples. And so if you just watch the arrows, okay? This is the movement of the sea peoples. These are refugees fleeing famine. And what do? Well, they team up with pirates, okay? And the pirates and the refugees together overwhelm existing civilization, including the Mycenaeans, okay? Present-day Greece, including the Hittite Empire, present-day Turkey, and they keep on attacking, okay? Even from the south, people are attacking the major cities. This is a world in complete collapse, okay? This is another map showing the invasions, okay? These again are the sea peoples. These are just economic migrants. These are refugees. Similar to what's happening today, where if you're following the news in Europe, you've got all these Middle Eastern refugees coming into Europe, overwhelming their economic systems. So this is a trend that we can expect to continue for a very long time, okay? All right, the sea peoples are just a mix of different people. We've tried to identify where they come from, who they are. We really don't know, okay? So the assumption is they come from everywhere. And they are being led by pirates who are expert at raiding other nations, okay? And this is a painting from Egypt. And yet we know because the Egyptians left records of the invasions of sea people. There were at least 3 major invasions of sea people. We're talking like hundreds of thousands of people attacking Egypt at the same time. And Egypt had to expend tremendous resources to repel these invasions, but it ultimately left Egypt bankrupt, okay? This is Eric Klein. He's an anthropologist at the University of Washington. He wrote a book called 1177, okay? And he lists the reasons why the Bronze Age collapse happened. And he says it was a perfect storm of crises, including climate change, which led to drought, which led to famine. There were also earthquakes. We're able to do analysis and discover that there were major earthquakes during this time. There were revolutions. There were civil wars. There was a migration crisis, okay? So it's a perfect storm of crises. But what I want to show you today is it all has to do with the nature of capital, okay? This is a proto-capitalistic system. All right, so my argument to you today is, yes, the Bronze Age collapsed because of a perfect storm of crises. That's what we know. But I want to extend this and say it has to do with the fact that it was a proto-capitalistic system, and so capital drives you to prosperity, but then it will also drive you to crisis, okay? That's the argument I will make to you today, all right? And we've seen this before. So this is the world right before World War I. As you can see, it was heavily, heavily globalized, okay? And people thought that because of trade, because of prosperity, we can't go to war, because why would we? And then, you know, a couple years later, World War I, where tens of millions of people died for no reason, okay? Tens of millions of people died for no reason. It was just a slaughter. And what I want to argue to you is that this is a very common thing. And if you look at the Bronze Age collapse in World War I, we are in a very similar situation, where the world is heavily globalized, it's heavily interconnected, but because of the nature of capital, we will probably fall off the edge at some point, okay? And people would argue that we're already reaching this point. Okay, so again, during the Bronze Age, okay, the High Bronze Age, the Late Bronze Age, 1400 to 1200 BCE, you can see this entire world is interconnected. And what you will also see is at the center of this world is really the Mediterranean and the Aegean Sea, okay? And which city is the most important strategically in this world? It's called this city, Troy, right? Troy, which is why we have the Trojan War. We will discuss actually the Trojan War next class, okay? But I point this out to you, okay? So why is this happening? Well, think about how in a proto-capitalistic system that depends on tin and copper, how do you make money, okay? Well, there are different ways. The first way you can make money is mining. Guess what? It sucks because it's hard work and you don't make that much money out of it, okay? It's just labor. Another way is processing it into ingots. Ingots are just ways to transport the tin and the copper, okay? You can also manufacture new jewelry, pottery, and weapons. Okay, that makes more money. Transporting, it's hard work, but you make more money, okay? Another way is just piracy, just steal the stuff. But the best way you can make money actually is by controlling trade routes, okay? That's what Troy is. Troy is a control of a trade route. And so that's how you make real money during globalization, okay? That's why even today, the Middle East is so important, because the Middle East is the center of all global trade. So whoever controls the Middle East controls global trade, okay? So remember this idea. We have empires because empires really are trade routes. Empires are just control of trade routes. Empires back then is very different from empires today. Empires today would be like nation states, which controls borders and have their own language. Back then, empires were just a collection of different trading points, okay, that were aligned with each other. And the Trojan War was just a trade war. That's all it was. We'll discuss this next class, okay? Okay, so you can see why Troy is so important. Because if you're in Anatolia, it's mainly mountains. It's good because you can mine for precious metals, and it's easy to defend, but it's hard to access the sea. That's why Troy is so important, okay? All right, so again, we know about globalization during the Bronze Age because of shipwrecks, okay? So this is a very famous shipwreck that we discovered off the coast of Turkey called Uluburun, okay? And inside it, you can see all this precious pottery. And we can actually date the location of where the pottery came from. Okay, so these are major sources of tin. And what's really important, this map tells you, is that they're actually in mountains. Okay, so they're hard to reach. That means you have to spend a lot of effort to create trade routes based on tin. Okay, these are ingots, okay? This is how you transport tin and copper. You transform it into ingots. And what's going to happen is that because the tin is located in isolated areas and it's high mountains, they have to use every form of transportation. And so in Europe, they mainly use the river system. And that's why all of Europe is brought into this trading network. This is Scandinavia. And as you can see, there's a lot of trade focused on Scandinavia as well. Okay, and this is something that we've not known before. We just assumed that Scandinavia didn't actually exist back then. It did exist. Okay, and it's a very important part of the trade network. Okay, so let's talk about the Indus Valley Civilization. The Indus Valley Civilization, for the longest time, we know was peaceful, egalitarian, and religious. And we know because we're able to dig up their cities. And what we discovered is that it's very much similar to Caerhun, where the housing is very similar, where irrigation, where hygiene, it's all very advanced. And we have no evidence of warfare because we can't find any weaponry. Okay, so why is Indus Valley so peaceful as compared to Egypt, Mesopotamia, and China? I think it was because they were able to trade with Mesopotamia, China, and Egypt and discovered we don't want this system. We don't want a system where everyone's killing each other, okay? That's my guess, but I don't know. No one knows, okay? This is one of the Indus Valley's major cities that we've dug up. This is another. As you can see, it's pretty advanced. The houses are pretty equal. It's very similar to Caerhun, okay? A much bigger version of Caerhun, which we discussed previously. This is an artist's rendition of what Indus Valley city would look like during that time, okay? What's amazing is that it's very advanced, it's very hygienic, it's very peaceful, it's very egalitarian. And religion was a major part of their lives during this time. Okay, so the Indus Valley Civilization will also give rise to something called the BMAC culture. Okay, and this is in actually North Afghanistan. How this developed was because of trade, right? Because as I discussed previously, tin is found in the mountains, and so you need to create a community around the mountain. So it's a mining town, but it's also for manufacturing, it's also for transportation, it's also for trade. So this is a pretty sophisticated, pretty complex area. But over time, what will happen is that the BMAC culture will bring in people from the steppes, okay? These are the Proto-Indo-Europeans we discussed previously. And then because of climate change, because of the collapse of Bronze Age, they will come and they will occupy both modern-day Iran as well as India, giving rise to two religions, the Zoroastrian religion as well as the Hindu religion. We'll discuss this at a later date. Okay, this is pottery from that Indus Valley civilization. Okay, let's move on to the Mycenaean civilization. Okay, the Mycenaean civilization is really important because it gives us Greek civilization, okay, which is considered the birthplace of all Western civilization. We'll discuss the Greeks next class, and specifically, but I will introduce the Mycenaeans now. Okay, Mycenae is in the center. We believe that the Mycenaean culture, it is a warrior aristocracy. So the people in charge are warriors as opposed to a priest aristocracy. Okay, so remember in Sumer, it was the priests that were in control. Now it's the warriors who are in control. And we also know that the Mycenaean people are descendants of the Proto-Indo-Europeans. Okay, so the Proto-Indo-Europeans swept into Europe, and then they went all the way down to Greece. Okay. And as you can see, Mycenae is really important because it's the center of all trade. At this time in history, the easiest way to get around the Mediterranean is by sea, okay? Land, it's very costly, it's very slow, and there's lots of bandits. So sea is the best way. So in this system, the best way to make money is actually piracy. So as you can see, there are lots of islands scattered around Greece. And so the Greeks in the beginning were mainly pirates, okay? So the people who invaded Troy during the Trojan War were pirates, okay? The Mycenaeans were famous for being pirates, okay? So as you can see, this is a much clearer map. Mycenaean civilization, they had pottery, they had olive oil, they had certain goods for trade, but mainly it was really about transportation, logistics, piracy, and controlling trade routes, okay? That's why Mycenae was so important at this time. This is Troy, by the way, okay? And as you can see, during the Trojan War, what will happen is you have different people of Mycenae go attack Troy because it's such a strategic location, right? If they're able to control Troy, they control the entire Aegean Sea. Okay? Okay, so this is an artist rendition of what the Mycenaean civilization looked like. It is what we call a palace economy, meaning all the center of the economy was a palace. What would happen is that all the farmers had to give the palace their food, and the palace would then take this food and redistribute it to the artisans, okay? People who made pottery, people who made clothing and textiles for trade purposes, okay? So it was a control and command economy centered off the palace, okay? This is what the palace looks like. This is what their economy looks like, okay? So all the food would go to the palace, and the palace would redistribute the food, and the palace would then take the food to give to the artisans to make textiles for trade, okay? And this is what the economy, it was a very simple economy, but it was very effective. It was an extremely wealthy place. This is a gold mass, okay? Gold is very rare, as you know, and they turn it into a king. Some have speculated this is the mass of Agamemnon, who's a major character in the Iliad. We'll discuss the Iliad next class. We actually don't know who this is, okay? This is a sword with a gold hilt. So it just shows you how extremely wealthy they are, right? Even their warriors had gold. This is something called the Lion's Gate. So the entrance into Mycenae. This is a very rough time. Lots of wars, lots of piracy. So there's lots of walls. Okay? The other thing about the Mycenaean civilization is their tombs are very, very elaborate. Okay, this is the entrance into one of their tombs. Over time, we see the tombs become more and more elaborate, so we know that over time they became a much more wealthy civilization. Okay, this is what their tombs look like. They're huge places. Okay, this is what the outside looks like. Where do the Mycenaeans learn this? Well, they learned this from Egypt, right? So at this time in history, the Mycenaeans and the Egyptians were in close contact with each other. The Egyptians have a habit of burying themselves with all their treasure. Okay, so this is their coffin. This is a mastaba, which is their tomb. Okay, as you can see, it's huge. It's almost as big as a house. So the question then is, why would they do that, okay? We've discussed it previously where throughout most of human history, we've understood that this is a material realm, and then once we die, we go off to the spiritual realm. Guess what, guys? You can't take your money with you. So why are you burying your money with you? Right? Okay, this is a mastaba, okay? As you can see, it's a very elaborate, ornate place. And the Egyptians were known for this. But also China, right? The first emperor of China, the terracotta warriors. Why is he buried with an army and such wealth? That makes no sense. If you die, you die. So why is this happening? So the argument I want to make to you is that this is happening because money, capital, too much of it changes the fundamental chemistry of the brain. It makes you crazy. Okay, so let's do a thought experiment. Okay, the thought experiment is this. Let's just say Satan were to come into this room and said, hey, I'll give you guys $1 billion, but you have to live forever and you have to be my slave forever. We'd be like, no, why would we want that? You know, like to have $1 billion, but then be a slave for all of eternity, like Satan? No. But, okay, let's assume we are the richest people on earth. We all have $10 billion, right? Now Satan says to us, you know what? $10 billion is a lot of money. I'm sure you enjoy your life, but you're going to die. And when you die, you can't take that money with you. But hey, I can make you live forever. I will let you keep this money, but you have to be my slave for all of eternity. Do you agree? We would agree. That's the difference. You see what's happened, right? Money makes people crazy. All right. So bronze. Okay. So remember, bronze started off as just a weapon in order to obtain power. But then over time, as powerful people became more stable in their lives, they used bronze to make jewelry and pottery to show their status, okay? And then over time, because rich people wanted it, everyone wanted it, and so bronze just became a currency, wealth. And it was just easy to store, universally recognized, and mobile. And this happened over centuries, over hundreds of years. Okay, that's a pattern here. All right, so this is a map, a table that shows you how capital is formed. Okay, so capital needs to have universality. The more people want it, the more valuable it is. It has to be able to be, it has to store value. Okay, it has to be permanent. Okay, does that make sense? It has to be mobile. It has to be available. Okay, it has to be rare enough. So once it has these different elements, then it becomes a currency. So if you just look at history, we've used different sources of currency. So we have seashells, cattle, grain, women, slaves, drugs, oil, bronze, gold, and US dollar. We've always had money as a concept, okay? But money, for most of human history, signified a debt that could not be paid off. Okay, so David Graeber, who's an anthropologist, he wrote about this in his book, Debt. Why do we create money as a concept? Because there are certain transactions in which there was so much debt you couldn't pay it off. Okay, so like most of human interactions, it's just reciprocal, right? So you help me, I help you. Okay, but there are three things in which the debt can't be really paid off. Okay, the first example is let's just say I kill your brother. Well, now you have to come kill me. Right? And if you kill me, then my family's going to go kill you, okay? And it creates a vicious cycle of vengeance, right? So the way to get rid of this problem is, if I kill your brother, I acknowledge that it's a debt I cannot be paid off. So I give you something valuable. It could be gold, it could be jewelry, it could be anything, okay? All right, so that's what money is. That's the first example. Second example is, if a woman marries into your family, right? Then that's also a debt that can be paid off. Because you've just taken away a daughter. So you give me a gift, maybe some gold, or maybe a cow, a horse, it doesn't matter, okay? That's the second example of a debt that can be paid off. The third example, and this is a really important example, is let's just say that you have a great person in the community. He's a great leader, or he's a great priest, or he's just a great person in general. And he's done a lot for you. But he dies. What do you do then? What you do is you bury him with gifts, with gold, with money, okay? And so it's a monument to his legacy. You know that he can't take the stuff with him to the afterworld, but it doesn't matter. All you're doing is you're acknowledging his contribution to your community. And that's why when you dig up graves in ancient times, you'll see people buried with gold. Because the community is acknowledging this person was great. We will forever remember him. And so the money is a way to acknowledge this fact. Okay, does that make sense? All right. So for most of human history, that's what we use money for, as to symbolize money that cannot be paid off. But then over time, as society became more sophisticated, we use other forms of currency. Okay, and as you can see, all these different forms of currency. Okay, whether it's seashells, cattle, grain, women, drugs, oil, it doesn't really work in terms of universality, stored value, and mobility. But bronze does. Okay. And after bronze, gold does. And then after gold, today we have the US dollar. Okay, does that make sense? Okay? So once you have an universally accepted currency, you can now have globalization. Right? And so bronze was a major discovery which allowed for globalization. Yeah, go ahead.
I think bronze and the gold is commodities and US dollar is like money stuff. But why does bronze? Because is it because drugs and oil does not count as capital? So it is not.
Okay, look, you're right, okay? Drugs can be a currency. The problem is that it's not universally accepted, okay? And also, the problem with drugs, of course, is it causes a lot of problems to your society. So think of opium in China. And it's hard, it creates a lot of problems. So it can't be universally accepted. In fact, most countries would ban drugs. But at the same time, you're right in that it is valuable. It's a store of value. So you guys don't know this, but there are lots of governments that have secret supplies of drugs. Because if the world falls apart and you need to rebuild society, you need wealth, right? So gold, you need gold, but guess what? Drugs is also a form of wealth because people want it, okay? People crave it, all right? So is this clear? Right? So once you have a universally accepted currency, you have the basis for globalization, and globalization happens naturally as a result. All right, so capital is just the monetization of power. That's all it is. And you can have any form of capital, okay? The problem with capital is that it exploits, it alienates, and it consolidates. Okay? So go back to the example where I'm the leader of a village. If there's no money involved, all I care about is winning the respect of my people. Okay? And so I work hard for them. But once capital is involved, I see each person as a commodity, okay? And therefore I become alienated from my humanity and from others. And now I want to exploit people in order to generate more capital. And over time what will happen is that the strongest will have all the capital, which leads to massive inequality. So the only result of capitalism is 1, massive inequality, corruption, immorality, okay, and alienation, anger, indifference. And this is the world we live in today. It doesn't make sense. It's just the nature of capital. There's no way around it. Okay, so as we discussed previously, we have 2 different mindsets, okay? We're composed of 2 different individuals. We have the altruistic nature, so that we care about relationships. We care about empathy. We care about creativity. And then our utilitarian side, which is all about material objectives, logic, and hard work, okay? So in school, you have the utilitarian mindset, okay? Like, how do I get good grades? That's all you care about, all right? At home, you care about relationships. You care about maintaining good relationships with your mother and your father and your siblings and your relatives. What we also know, and this is really important, is that people who are altruistic, people who work for others, tend to be more creative than other people. But people who are obsessed with money tend to work harder than other people, okay? That's why globalization happens so fast, because everyone's in a rush to make as much money as possible. Okay? But eventually you reach a point where a few people have all the money, and so everyone's like, screw this, I give up because I'm never going to be rich. You lie flat, right? Tongue ping or quiet quitting. You just give up. Okay? And this is the world we live in today. Okay, now capitalism is a problem because it changes the fundamental nature of your brain. Okay? So this is an article from the Atlantic Monthly, which is a very popular magazine in the United States. There are these neuroscientists who have done brain scans, and they discovered that power causes brain damage, okay? In fact, if you look at the brain of a psychopath and the brain of a wealthy person, it's pretty similar, okay? Yeah, they did brain scans, and it looks as though people who has too much money has brain damage. Why? Because a normal person is able to have empathy, is able to understand the feelings of others. Guess what? If you're too powerful, if you're too wealthy, you don't have the capacity to have empathy. You can't appreciate the feelings of others. So think of like Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg. They have absolutely no concept of empathy, okay? They're completely unable to relate to the feelings of other people. This is Brian Johnson, okay? Brian Johnson's a millionaire. He spends about $2 million a year on health, okay? He's done some crazy things. So for example, he has a father and he has a son. And he believes in blood transfusion. So if you transfuse your blood, you become younger. So he's trying to figure out how to live forever. Okay, so he'll do things like blood transfusion. But he works so hard, man, because he'll get up at like 5 o'clock in the morning, exercise. The food he eats is the most nutritious food in the world. And he'll regulate his sleep. He's always monitoring his heartbeat. He's always exercising, okay? His life sucks. And the question you have to ask yourself is, if you have so much money, why don't you just enjoy it, Why not just enjoy your life? Why are you focused on living forever, okay? And that's a problem with wealthy people. They're kind of scooping the head, okay? He looks like a vampire, guys, okay? This is him when he first, started this project. And you can see he looks like a vampire now, all right? I'm not exaggerating here. Look at this guy. The problem is that there are lots of wealthy people in the world, and they happen to like this idea of living forever. Okay? So let's just say, let's do a thought experiment. You're a billionaire. Okay? You have like $100 million, $10 million. Sorry, like $10 billion in the bank, $100 billion in the bank. Who knows? You have a problem, which is, how do I keep this, right? Because you're gonna die. Okay? And you have all that money, so you can do whatever you want. So what you do is you invest in Brian Johnson, you invest in scientific research to live longer, but you also do what? You also build bunkers, okay? Because you're afraid that the world will end and you want to live forever, so you build bunkers. This is Mark Zuckerberg's bunker in Hawaii. It's kind of stupid because if the world's going to end, is your bunker going to save you? Probably not, okay? But he spent like $26 million, or $260 million on this stupid thing, hoping to live forever. And this is what it looks like on the inside. It's crazy to like go through life thinking about how to live forever and how to survive an apocalypse. Why not just enjoy your life, okay? They also join secret societies. Why? Because secret societies may have the secret to reincarnation, or the secret to immortality, or the secret to longevity. They don't care. They have so much money that they're willing to invest in everything. Okay, so they're willing to try blood transfusion. They're willing to build bunkers. They're also willing to join secret societies. And that's why you see secret societies growing in power and popularity today. They also worship Satan, okay? Because, again, if you have $10 billion, you're stuck, right? Because you don't want to die. Like, you don't want to, like, it's what we call sunk cost fallacy, right? You're like, I worked so hard for this, and I have the best life, but I'm going to die. And when I die, all this is gone. I have to start all over again. I don't want to do that, okay? So they're willing to do anything, including worship Satan. In fact, what we will learn is that the religion of Satan became so popular in order to solve this problem, where wealthy people, they want to live forever. And they want the world to stay the same as it is now. But as you learn in this class, it is impossible for the world to stay the way it is. Change is a constant. Things move in cycles. Capitalism gives rise to wealth, but it also destroys wealth. That's just the nature of life. Okay? All right, so that's a Bronze Age collapse. Any questions? Sorry, yeah. Go ahead, Vit. Go ahead.
Why do they worship Satan? Because you said that those millionaires, they want to keep their money forever, and what does it do with Satan?
Okay, that's a really good question, okay? So, it's really desperation, right? Because what religion teaches you is that wealth is bad. And when you go to heaven, you'll be judged by God. And God is going to ask you, hey, why do you have so much money, man? And you'll be like, well, I stole this money, and I hurt a lot of people, and I cheated, I lied, I steal, yeah, you know? And like, do you really want to say that to God? Yeah, you're kind of stuck, right? Right? So first of all, you don't want to die. You don't want to give up all this money that you worked hard to get, but you also don't want to face God and face his judgment. Okay, so what's your alternative here? Your alternative is you believe in something more powerful than God, or at least someone who you can find refuge in from God. Okay, if it means going to hell, you prefer going to hell than facing judgment from God, okay? Because you in your heart know exactly what you did to get that $10 billion, okay? You know what you did. Maybe other people don't know, but you know what you did, and God knows what you did. And you really, really want to face judgment, all right? Okay, so, yeah. Does that make sense? Okay. Any more questions, guys? All right, so that's it for the Bronze Age. So we will discuss the Iliad next class, okay? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce the Iliad today, and then we'll continue the Iliad on Thursday. Okay. All right. So the Bronze Age collapse is important because it will give rise to Greek civilization, which we believe to be the basis for Western civilization, okay? So the question then is, how does this happen, okay? So if you look at Mycenaean Greece, and then we transition into the Dark Ages, okay? The Dark Ages does not, all it means is that the Greeks lost the capacity to write, okay? And so what will happen is Mycenaean Greece will transform from a palace economy into something called the polis. Okay, polis just means city-state, okay? This is where we get the word politics from. Okay, so this is a major political transition where you went from a centralized economy to now city-states competing against each other. That's the first thing. Second thing that's important is the writing system changes. It went from linear B now becomes, do you guys know? What's the new writing system called? I'm sure you guys know the name, alphabet. Okay? All right. And the third big change is you go from censorship, okay? Because remember, in a palace economy, in a centralized system, bureaucrats are in control. And bureaucrats control what is talked about, okay? Or what is expressed. And they censor and centralize content, okay? They basically create propaganda. So now without censorship, you have a new person emerge named Homer. Okay, and we will discuss Homer next class. And these three things together become the basis for Greek civilization. And this is why the Greeks became the greatest civilization ever in human history. So the main lesson I want to leave you today is, yes, collapse is bad, but collapse also gives opportunity for a new civilization to arise, for a new humanity to emerge. And we will discuss this next class, okay? The birth of Greek civilization. All right, great. All right. Good morning. So today we do Greek civilization. We are focusing on Homer, who wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. A couple years ago, I taught the great books. So we read the Bible, Dante, Paradise Lost, the Iliad, and the Odyssey. And believe it or not, the students' favorite book was the Iliad. And this was written maybe 3,000 years ago by this Greek man living in a different time, different culture. Even today, Chinese teenagers think he's wonderful. Okay, so Homer is, I believe, the big bang of Greek civilization. All right, so let us summarize where we are. Okay, let's review where we are, okay? So remember that in the beginning, you have this city emerge in a major trade route, and it occupies a major river. And over time, what will happen is that as the city expands, it will create colonies along the river. And this will create warfare among the city-states because they're trying to control trade. Okay? And this leads to what we call open, cooperative competition. And as I keep on saying, this is a system that will lead to tremendous innovation. Okay, and this is what happened in China, in Mesopotamia, and in Egypt. But then over time, what will happen is that an empire will emerge, and this will create a bureaucracy. Okay? Now, bureaucracy has three major characteristics. The first is centralization. And because of centralization, you now have a monopoly. And so you have a decrease in competition, which means that the society is no longer innovative. Okay? Second is you have censorship, meaning that people are no longer free to express what they want. All information is centralized. The third is writing as propaganda. So writing is a system of control as opposed to a system of knowledge creation or self-expression. Okay? So these are the 3 characteristics of an empire. And this is true for all empires. And this is true for Mycenaean Greece. So remember, Mycenaean Greece is the empire that ruled the Aegean Sea during the Bronze Age. What's interesting though is when the Bronze Age collapsed, this system allowed for massive innovation, which gave us the Greeks. Okay, so let me explain why. First of all, you don't have centralization. What you now have is something called a polis. So you basically have a return to the system of open warfare. The polis means city-state in Greek. And it gives us the word politics. Why? Because these polises were at war with each other always. And because every citizen had to risk his life in a war, every citizen had the right to speak. Okay? So before every decision was made, all the citizens could debate. And so as a citizen, you were required to speak in front of others. And as a result, you, even though you could be a farmer, you had to educate yourself. You had to gain knowledge. You had to learn the art of speaking, what we call rhetoric. And this allowed for massive education and innovation in Greece. The polis, because everyone had to learn, they had to change the writing system from one of propaganda to one of knowledge seeking. So they changed the writing system. So during the Mycenaean age, the writing system is called Linear B. And Linear B is a hard system to learn, but that's the point. They want the writing system to be hard to learn because then only the elite can learn it. And that's what differentiates the elite from the people, right? But now that everyone has to learn, you need a more efficient writing system. And so they created a new system called the alphabet, which is the same system we use today because it's so effective, okay? So let me explain what the alphabet is. All right, so in the beginning, when we first started to write, we had pictograms, okay? So this is the sun, this is the moon, okay? Sun and moon. As you can see, these are just pictures of words, okay? That's the first step. But then people realize, you know what, we actually don't have to write down, we actually don't have to draw out the pictures, we can just use symbols, okay? So now you use symbols, like maybe an O and this, okay? This now becomes a sun, moon. And then people realize, you know what? There are actually a lot of words we cannot draw out. But if we make the symbol representing a sound as opposed to an idea, that'd be a lot more efficient, right? And so now you can create new words. This is the word now for monsoon. Because all you're doing is you're adding 2 sounds together, okay? And this is what I call a syllabary, okay? And so Linear B was a syllabary. And the Chinese system is what I call an ideogram. Ideogram, okay? So it's not representing sounds, it's representing ideas, all right? And then people realize, you know what? For it to be most efficient, to be most flexible, to be most versatile, we can just have the symbol represent a part of a sound. Okay, so rather than a complete sound, just a part of the sound. So now this becomes M, this becomes S. Okay, and so you now get the word sum. And this is where we get alphabet from. What the Greeks did was they added vowels to the system. Okay, and this is the most efficient writing system in the world. It's really easy to learn, as you know, from English class, as opposed to Chinese, which is very hard to learn. Okay, so now you have the alphabet, which increases literacy and learning throughout the Greek world. For entertainment, what they did was they invited bards, poets, to come and give recitals, to talk about the legends of the past. And this gave rise to the most famous poet of that time named Homer. And we will discuss Homer today, okay? And so in a centralized system, Homer could not have arisen because Homer would have been a propagandist. But now in this decentralized system, where everyone is looking for entertainment, for knowledge, Homer can arise. And Homer will be the greatest poet of Greek civilization, and he's considered to be the father of Greek civilization, okay? So we will discuss Homer today. And Homer is famous because he wrote 2 books, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Actually, he didn't write the books. He recited the poetry, and then his students wrote it down because he himself was illiterate. And we also think he was blind, okay? So the Iliad and the Odyssey are about the Trojan War. Okay, so let me explain to you what the Trojan War is. Okay, so from last class, you know that Troy was the center of the world. It was the heart and center of global trade, and that's why pirates kept on raiding Troy. Okay? Now, as you also know, facts become stories, and stories become exaggerated over time. And that's what gave us the legend of the Trojan War, okay? So let's go over the basic outline. So there are the gods up in Mount Olympus. The king god, of course, is Zeus. And the 3 goddesses are Hera, who is the queen god. They are Athena, the goddess of wisdom, and Aphrodite, who is the goddess of love. Okay, Hera is the queen, the mother. Athena and Aphrodite are the daughter of Zeus. So it's one big family. One day, they discover a golden apple on Mount Olympus, and the golden apple says, "To the most beautiful in the world." So of course, all 3 believe it must be mine. And so they fight and they fight and they fight. And Zeus is going crazy because they won't stop fighting. So Zeus has an idea. He will have a contest. And in this contest, the golden apple will be awarded to one of the 3, okay? But now he needs to find someone stupid enough to be the judge. And he finds this person named Paris. And Paris is a prince of Troy. And so Paris meets the 3 goddesses, and of course, each goddess is trying to bribe Paris. So Hera says, "Paris, if you pick me, I will give you a kingdom. I will make you a king." And Paris is like, "That's a really attractive offer, okay?" Then Athena says, "Hey, if you pick me, I will give you all the wisdom in the world. You will be the wisest man in the world." And Paris is like, "Okay, that sounds cool, sure." And then Aphrodite says, "I'm going to give you the hottest girl in the world." And Paris is like, "Yes, that's what I want, man," okay? So he marries Helen. This may sound strange to you. Like, why would you give up power and wisdom for, sex? And so I was talking to my wife about this because I didn't understand Paris's choice, right? And she said, "Of course you pick Helen, because what matters to guys is status, face, right? You're a king, but there are lots of other kings. You have wisdom, but who knows you have wisdom, right? But hey, if you're walking around the world with the hottest girl in the world, you feel good about yourself, okay? So of course you pick Helen." So there you go. My wife knows more than I do, all right? But anyway, so now this is a problem because now Hera and Athena are pissed off and they want revenge. In fact, they're so pissed off, they decide they're going to destroy not just Paris, but the entire Trojan people. Okay? They're going to wipe out Troy from the face of the earth. They want revenge. Another problem is, at this time, Helen is married to Menelaus, who is the king of Sparta. and his brother is Agamemnon, who is the king of Argos. And Sparta and Argos are the two most powerful places in Greece. So Agamemnon is the king of kings. He is the king of Mycenaean Greece. And so they organize this huge army to attack Troy, to retrieve Helen. Okay? And this will go on for 10 years, this battle in Troy. And this will give rise to many legends that Homer will use to entertain the Greek people after the fall of the Mycenaean Empire. Two of the most famous heroes of this time, and there are like hundreds, okay, are Achilles and Odysseus. Odysseus is known for being the wisest of the Greeks, the greatest strategist. Achilles is known for being the bravest warrior. Okay? Odysseus will come up with the idea of the Trojan horse, which is what ends the war. Because as you know, what will happen is the Greeks will sneak inside a horse, a wooden horse, pretend that it's a gift to the Trojans. The Trojans will take the horse inside the city. The Greeks will sneak out at night and kill everyone, okay? All right, so that's the story of the Trojan War. What Homer will do is he will take this epic, okay, this legend, and turn it into a great story. He does not tell the whole story, he only tells a part of the story. He tells the story of the battle between Achilles and Agamemnon, okay? So let's go over the plot of the Iliad. Okay? The Iliad. All right, so the story begins like this. Agamemnon has arrived in Troy with his entire army. But Troy is a walled city, and these guys are pirates, so they cannot destroy Troy. So what they do is, well, they're pirates, so they go and raid other islands that are allies of Troy. And what they do is they capture booty, which includes beautiful young girls. Okay? And they have these girls as sex slaves. Now, the custom of war is that if the girl belongs to a powerful family, that family can choose to ransom her back, and you have to give her back, okay? Now, it turns out that Agamemnon likes his girl, but she's the daughter of a powerful priest. And the priest says, give me back my girl and I'll give you a lot of money. And Agamemnon says, no, I like her, and I'm lonely, so screw off. So this priest gets angry and prays to Apollo. And Apollo unleashes a plague on the Greeks. And everyone's dying, okay? And so Achilles discovers what's happened, and he confronts Agamemnon in a war council. And he says, Agamemnon, you have to give the girl back, or else we're all going to die here. And Agamemnon says, fine, I will give her back, but only on the condition that I take your girl. And of course, Achilles is pissed off. He's like, that's not fair. And Agamemnon's like, too bad, I'm king. And so Achilles says, fine, but I will never fight for you ever again. I'm going to let the Trojans destroy you here. I'm the greatest warrior in the world. I'm going to sit back and I'm going to let the Trojans destroy you, okay? So after that meeting, Achilles goes to his mother, who's a goddess. Her name is Thetis, and she's a river goddess. And Achilles says to Thetis, listen, mother, could you help me out? Could you tell Zeus to help the Trojans? The reason why is I want the Greeks to lose so that they beg me to save them. I came to Troy to be a hero. So let the Trojans win, and then I'll come and save the Greeks, and I'll be a great hero. So that's what Thetis does. And Hector, who is the prince of Troy, okay, he's brother to Paris, he discovers that Achilles is absent from the battlefield. So he leads the Trojans against the Greeks, and they're destroying the Greeks. They're at the point where they've almost reached the Greek ships, and they want to burn down the Greek ships because if they do that, the Greeks cannot resupply themselves, and they will all die in Troy. And so at this point, Odysseus and the other Greeks say to Agamemnon, you know what? We need Achilles. Please, please get Achilles back into the battlefield. And Agamemnon says, fine. Tell him this. Tell him I will give him my daughter in marriage. I will give him all the treasure in the world if he comes and fights for us. So Odysseus and the Greeks go to Achilles and says, please, please, please help us. And Achilles says, no. Why? Because Agamemnon's not here. Where's Agamemnon, man? I don't need his daughter. I don't need all this money in the world. I'm going to die anyway in battle, so screw off, okay? So now Achilles and Agamemnon are stuck because Achilles wants Agamemnon to apologize, but Agamemnon doesn't want to lose face. So there's a real threat that the Trojans will destroy the entire Greek army, okay? And they're about to reach the ships and burn down the ships. And Achilles is watching this, and he's like, why aren't the Greeks coming and begging me again, okay? He wants the Greeks to constantly beg him so he can say no. And the Greeks are like, we know that, so we're not going to come. So then what happens is Achilles, he's so nervous that he sends Patroclus, who is his lieutenant, to go talk to the Greeks and say, hey man, what's going on? Do you need Achilles' help? And the Greeks say to him, Patroclus, we know Achilles, he's got this terrible temper, he's not going to come save us, but maybe you can save us, Patroclus. And Patroclus says, yes, I can be the hero now. So he runs back to Achilles and says, Achilles, you asshole, we're all going to die here, let me go fight. And Achilles is like, fine, you can go fight, but only on the condition that you just save the ships and you do not push the Trojans back to Troy, okay? That's my glory. Do not steal my glory. So of course what Patroclus does is he tries to win all the glory for himself. He forces a duel between himself and Hector Hector kills Patroclus. Now Achilles is pissed off. And Achilles is like, screw this, I'm going to go kill Hector. Okay, so now Agamemnon and Achilles are best friends because they both want to kill Hector. Achilles duels Hector, kills him, and he is now the greatest warrior in the world. He's proven himself to be the greatest hero in the world. He's saved the Greeks. He's killed Hector. He's avenged his friend Patroclus. He should be the happiest man in the world, right? And this is the genius of Homer. He now falls into a deep depression. He mutilates Hector's body. He ties Hector's body to his chariot and rides around the city of Troy. And all the Trojans are screaming in horror. The gods are like, this is disgusting, man. The Greeks are like, no, man, this is a war crime. We don't want to get involved, okay? Achilles is going crazy. He can't sleep. He can't eat. All he can do is mutilate Hector's body. All right? So now the gods are watching this and saying, you know what? We shouldn't allow this because this is a war crime. And Hector was always a good subject. So let's broker a peace between Achilles and Priam, who is the father of Hector. Okay? Because in this world, it's important to bury the dead. Because only by burying the dead can they find eternal peace. Okay? So Priam wants a body back. So Priam himself cannot sleep, and both Achilles and Priam agree to this deal. The gods send Priam into Achilles' tent. And Achilles is busy, okay? Achilles is distracted, and Priam is sitting next to him. And at this point, what Priam can do is take a dagger and stab Achilles in the neck and avenge his son, right? What he does instead is he kneels down before Achilles and kisses his hand. He submits himself before Achilles. And Achilles is so awed by this that he recognizes that Priam is the greater hero. That Priam has more courage than he does. And now Achilles submits to Priam. And the two forgive each other and weep together. And this is how the Iliad ends. Okay? This is a story that tells us that the real battlefield is not out there in the shores of Troy. The real battle is inside our human heart. Okay? Why does Achilles fall into depression? Because he himself knows he's he's the one guilty for killing of Patroclus. Maybe it was Hector who killed Patroclus, but it was Achilles who made it possible. Why? Because number one, Achilles didn't have to get in a stupid fight with Agamemnon, okay? Number two is, when the Greeks came to beg, Achilles could have said yes, okay? And then number three is, Achilles did not have to send Patroclus into battle. So Achilles knows in his heart that he was guilty. And as such, he could not forgive himself. And so he fell into depression. And so Priam, by forgiving Achilles, allowed Achilles to forgive himself. Okay? So it's a problem of forgiveness. And this is the hardest problem in human society. How do you forgive those who've done wrong to you? And how do you forgive yourself for doing wrong unto others? This is the hardest problem in human society. If you can solve this problem, you can now create a great civilization. That's what Homer did, okay? Homer showed us that this is the greatest problem in the human heart. And when we forgive each other, we make the world anew. We rejuvenate the world. We change the world from one of destruction into one of vitality. Okay? Priam, by sacrificing himself, by having the courage to forgive Achilles, changed the destiny of himself and his son Hector, because Achilles gave Hector back and told Priam, not only will I give your son back, but I will make sure that you have enough time to ensure a proper funeral for Hector. Achilles himself will ensure the Greeks will not attack Troy during the funeral. Okay? And that's the beauty and power of the Iliad. It is the most shocking ending ever. It's the most beautiful, the most poignant, the most tragic ending ever. Even today, we cannot match it. So the question now is, how is it that Homer and the Greeks had such wisdom, and today we don't? And the answer is, their minds were different back then than they are today. Okay? So let me explain why. Okay, so you know from psychology that we have two hemispheres in the brain, okay? A right hemisphere and a left hemisphere. The right hemisphere is the creative, emotional, caring hemisphere. The left is the logical, analytical, utilitarian hemisphere, okay? So right does art, maybe left does math. Okay, we know this from simple psychology. Now, there's an American psychologist named Julian Jaynes. And he proposes a really interesting theory. His theory is, actually what's happening is the right hemisphere is receiving information from the universe, vibrations from the universe. And the left hemisphere is interpreting this information into reality. Okay? All right? So remember, we discussed Kant. What does Immanuel Kant say? Immanuel Kant says that there are two realities, the noumena, the world, the things in themselves, and the phenomena, the things to us. Okay? So what happens is that our brain interacts with the noumena and then filters it back into the phenomena, okay? And it uses a filter, time and space, in order to perceive things, okay? Hegel says that this noumena is the Geist, okay, the universe. And as we discussed, the universe are just vibrations, okay? Vibrations. And so, if you apply all this to this theory, what's happening is our right brain is receiving these vibrations. And then our left brain is just transforming these vibrations into everyday reality, okay? Then the question then is, how do we interpret these vibrations? Well, for most of human history, we've interpreted them as just gods and spirits. Okay? And even though it's not factual, it is truthful in that it allows us to better understand the universe, and it better allows us to understand ourselves, okay? by embracing this model of the brain, we have access to wisdom, okay? The wisdom of Homer and the Greeks. And that's why back then, the Greeks are much more creative and wise than we are today, okay? Does that make sense? Okay, because what we've done today is we've shut off this part by saying, nope, all that matters is science, logic, and materialism. Okay? So we've shut down the right brain. And we only use the left brain today. That's why we are less creative. Right? So that's the argument I will make to you today. All right. Let's continue. All right, the Great Big Bang, the beginning of Greek civilization. All right, so this is Julian James, okay? And he wrote a book called The Origin of Consciousness in the Breakdown of the Bicameral Brain. Okay, the bicameral mind is just the left and right hemisphere. And these two work together. The right is the receiver of the universe, the left is the interpreter of the universe. All right, so he gives an example of this. Okay, why is it that in ancient times, when kings died, we buried them with lots and lots of gifts? We buried them as though they were still alive. And the answer is, from our perspective, they were still alive, okay? The burial of the important dead as if they still lived is common to almost all these ancient cultures whose architecture we have just looked at. This practice has no clear explanation except that their voices were still being heard by the living and were perhaps demanding such accommodation. These dead kings propped up on stones whose voices were hallucinated by the living were the first gods. Okay? Does that make sense to you? We lived in a world where we're using both our left and right hemispheres, and as such, we saw spirits, deities, gods all around us, okay? And we interacted with them, and they gave us both inspiration as well as motivation. Okay, and so this is a Viking ship burial where a king is being buried with his ship and his horses, as though he was still alive. Okay? Because from their perspective, he's still alive. He's still able to give us his wisdom. This is the cult of the skull, which is what we found in most Neolithic cultures, okay? The earliest agricultural societies. Why? Because they practiced ancestor worship and they believed that these skulls were living and they could help you access the dead in the spirit world and draw wisdom and inspiration from them. This is a book, The Cosmic Serpent by Jerry Narby, okay? And he tells us that, listen, if you just do some basic research, this understanding of the universe, where our right brain receives spirits and left brain interprets it in reality, it makes a lot of sense, okay? Because the entire universe is itself consciousness, okay? It's all mind, and matter is just what we perceive. I began my investigation with the enigma of plant communication. Okay, plants are able to communicate with each other. We know that scientifically. I went to accept the idea that hallucinations could be a source of verifiable information. Okay, so if you feel as though a spirit is talking to you, maybe the spirit really is talking to you. And I end up with a hypothesis suggesting that a human mind can communicate and defocalize consciousness with a global network of DNA-based life. All this contradicts principles of Western knowledge. Okay? So the entire universe is consciousness. Plants have it, animals have it, we have it, and therefore, if we open our minds, we're able to communicate with the entire universe and draw insight. All right, and he goes on. Scientists know this, and our greatest discoveries came from scientists who embraced the consciousness of the universe. Many of science's central ideas seem to come from beyond the limits of rationalism. René Descartes dreams of an angel who explains the basic principles of materialistic rationalism to him. Albert Einstein daydreams in a tram approaching another and conceives the theory of relativity. James Watson scribbles on a newspaper in a train, then rides his bicycle to reach the conviction that DNA has the form of a double helix. Okay? So it's almost as though a spirit is telling the secrets of the universe to the scientists. So, and just ask yourself these questions, and you will understand that maybe the universe is consciousness, right? So these questions are, sometimes you think of someone and then boom, that person calls you. Is that strange? Okay, has that ever happened to you? Do you feel as though you're being watched all the time? Do you feel as though you're an actor on a stage? Do you sometimes feel you're compelled to act as though something has taken control of your body? Okay, possession. Why do certain ideas pop into your head all of a sudden? Do you sometimes feel as though something planted an idea into you? Why do you have dreams? Where do dreams come from? What do dreams mean? Do you sometimes feel as though you know what someone else is thinking, okay? Is it possible you're sitting with a friend and you know exactly what your friend is thinking, even though you're not talking? Do you think sometimes that you're having a conversation with a friend inside your head, okay? So your friend is not there, but you're having a conversation with your friend. Do you feel as though you have a guardian angel? Okay, I'm sure you're too shy to say this, but I'm sure that you feel as though there is a spirit world, right? Okay, these were not mysteries and questions before because everyone assumed we lived alongside spirits, angels, and demons, okay? Today we ask these questions. Before they didn't ask these questions because everyone just assumed that, yeah, of course, we live alongside angels and demons, and that's why we are who we are. Okay, so let's go to the Iliad, okay? And the Iliad, it shows us how the brain worked at that time. A brain that was both materialistic and spiritual. A brain that understood that we lived in different dimensions, okay? And the gods had more control over us, and the gods represented our emotions and the workings of nature, okay? The Iliad. This is a translation by Robert Fagles. So let's, at the very beginning of the Iliad, okay, Homer says this: "Rage, goddess, sing the rage of Peleus' son Achilles, murderers, doom that caused Achaeans countless losses, hurling down to the house of death so many sturdy souls, great fighter souls, but made their bodies carrion, feast for the dogs and birds, and the will of Zeus was moving toward its end. Begin, muse, when the two first broke in clash, Agamemnon, lord of man, and brilliant Achilles." Okay, so the first thing that Homer says is, "Please inspire me, muse." Okay, so what he's doing is not creating, what he's doing is channeling. He's drawing inspiration from the gods. Okay, when he's speaking to people, he's saying, "I am here as a messenger of the gods." This information is from the gods themselves. All right, so this is the fatal meeting, or sorry, not the fatal meeting, the clash between Agamemnon and Achilles, the first meeting that starts off the Iliad. So Agamemnon says to Achilles, "Give me your slave girl and get out of here," okay? And Achilles says, "Screw you, I'm not gonna fight for you again." But now Achilles is pissed off. He wants to kill Agamemnon, okay? Agamemnon broke off and anguish gripped Achilles. The heart in his rugged chest was pounding, torn. Should he draw the long, sharp sword slung at his hip, thrust through the ranks and kill Agamemnon now, or check his rage and beat his fury down, okay? So he can't control himself, okay? Rage has overtaken him. He wants to step forward and just kill Agamemnon. As his raging spirit veered back and forth, just as he drew his huge blade from his sheath, down from the vaulting heavens swept Athena. Athena's here now, okay, before Achilles. The white-armed goddess Hera sped her down. Hera loved both men and cared for both alike. Rearing behind him, Peleus ceased his fury here. Only Achilles saw her, none of the other fighters. Struck with wonder, he spun around. He knew her at once, okay? So Achilles is a hallucinating Athena. No one else can see her, okay? Pallas Athena, the terrible blazing of those eyes, and his winged words went flying. Why now? Child of Zeus, with a shield of thunder, why come now? To witness the outrage Agamemnon just committed? I tell you this, and so help me, it's the truth. He'll soon pay for his arrogance with his life. So he really wants to kill Agamemnon. Her gray eyes clear, the goddess Athena answered, "Down from the skies I come to check your rage. If only you will yield." The white-armed goddess Hera spread me down. She loves you both. She cares for you both alike. Stop this fighting now. Don't lay hand to sword. Lash him with threats of the price that he will face. And I tell you this, and I know it is the truth. One day glittering gifts will lie before you 3 times over to pay for all his outrage. Hold back now, obey us both. Okay? So Achilles wants to kill Agamemnon, but now he's being possessed by Athena, okay? And Athena says, stop. Okay? So she urged, and the swift runner complied at once. I must, when the two of you had down commands, goddess, a man submits, though his heart breaks with fury. Better for him by far. If a man obeys the gods, they're quick to hear his prayers. And with that, Achilles stayed his burly hand on the silver hilt and slid the huge blade back in his sheath. He would not fight the orders of Athena, okay? So again, this is not factual. Athena doesn't really exist, but it's truthful in that it gives us insight into how the human brain and the human emotions work, okay? Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to write this again in modern prose to show you the difference, okay? Okay, so this is what I wrote myself. Okay, it's bad writing, it's modern prose, but you're able to compare and contrast, okay? I don't need you, get out of my sight, roared Agamemnon. He spat on the ground. Achilles' blood boiled and he reached for the hilt of his sword. He saw all eyes stare at him and he stayed focused on Agamemnon. He counted the seconds and the steps it would take for him to sprint forward and strike him down. His feet grew heavy and his legs grew wobbly. He could not move. He felt the thumping of his heart. Achilles snapped around and walked out of the room. He saw all eyes focus on him, okay? So this is factual, but it's not truthful. Do you understand? It doesn't give us insight into why this is happening. So the Iliad is truthful but not factual. Modern prose is factual but not truthful. So now, as I said, Achilles refuses to fight, the Greeks are losing the war, and so the Greeks beg Achilles to come fight. Achilles says no. And he sends Patroclus to figure out what's going on. And Patroclus comes back and says, let me fight Achilles. Okay? And at this point, Achilles should just be like, we'll fight together, or don't go, Patroclus is too dangerous. Instead, he says this. So he pleaded, lost in his own great innocence, condemned to beg for his own death and brutal doom. Okay, he is Patroclus. And moved now to his depths, the famous runner cried, no, no, my prince Patroclus, what are you saying? Prophecies? None that touch me, none I know of. No doom my noble mother revealed to me from Zeus. Just this terrible pain that wounds me to the quick. When one man attempts to plunder a man his equal, to commandeer a prize, exulting so in his own power. That's a pain that wounds me, suffering such humiliation. That girl, the sons of Achaea, picked her as my prize, and I sacked the walled city, won her my spear, but right from my grasp he tears her, mighty Agamemnon, that son of Atreus, treating me like some vagabond, some outcast stripped of all my rights. So the Greek army is about to be destroyed, and Achilles is concerned about his own pride. Okay, he's a very selfish person. Agamemnon stole his girlfriend, and he's pissed. Enough, let bygones be bygones now. Done is done. How on earth can a man rage on forever? Still by God, I said I would not relax my anger, not till the cries and carnage reach my own ships. So you strap my splendid armor on your back, you lead our battle-hungry Meridians into action. And now, in fact, the black cloud of the Trojans blasts down on the ships with full gale force, our backs to the breaking surf, but clinging still to a cramped strip of land, the Argives lost. The whole city of Troy comes trampling down on us, daring, wild. Why? They cannot see the brow of my helmet flash before their eyes. Oh, they'll soon run for their lives and choke the torn beds of the field with all their corpse, if only the mighty Agamemnon met with me with respect, okay? So the Trojans are attacking them because he's not in the battlefield. But if he were in the battlefield, the Trojans would just run away, okay? Now, as it is, they're fighting around our camp. No spear rages now in the hand of Diomedes, keen to save the Argives from disaster. I can't even hear the battle cry of Agamemnon break from his hated skull, but it's man-killing Hector, calling his Trojans on, his war cries crashing around me. Savage cries of his Trojans sweeping the whole plain. Victors bring the Argive armies to their knees. Even so, Patroclus, fight disaster off the ships. Fling yourself at the Trojans full force before they gut our hulls with leaping fire and tear away the beloved day of our return. But take this command to heart, obey to the end. You can win great honor, great glory for me in the eyes of all the Argive ranks, and they'll send her back, my live and lovely girl, and top it off with troves of glittering gifts. Once you have whipped the enemy from the fleet, you must come back, Patroclus. Even if Zeus, the thundering lord of Hera, lets you seize your glory, you must not burn for war against these Trojans, madmen lusting for battle. Now about me, you will only make my glory that much less, okay? Me. All Achilles cares about is me. Patroclus, you can go to battle, but don't win too much glory. Do not outshine me, okay? And because he says this, what does Patroclus do? He tries to win all the glory for himself. He engages in a duel with Hector, and it costs him his life, okay? So it's Achilles' fault this is happening, and he knows it. All right, so the psychology here is just so insightful, so deep, so striking. So let's use an analogy to understand the psychology, okay? Let's pretend John and Jill are boyfriend and girlfriend, but they have a fight, like boyfriend and girlfriend do, and they break up, okay? But they long for each other, but they don't want to apologize to each other, okay? So Jill tells her best friend Jane to talk to John to try to get him to apologize, all right? And then Jane talks to John, and John says, you know what? I've had it with Jill. I'd much rather date you, because you're more beautiful, and you're more, reasonable. And then Jane's really excited because Jill's prettier than she is, right? So she runs back to Jill and says, hey, John asked me to go on a date. Maybe I can use this opportunity to convince him to apologize. And then Jill says, okay, go date him. But what if you do? Don't kiss him. So what does Jill do? Right? So this is reverse psychology, right? Okay? So Jill knows that if she says this, Jane's going to kiss John. And Achilles knows that if he tells Patroclus, don't win too much glory, Patroclus is going to win a lot of glory, right? And so what happens, of course, is that Patroclus dies, and now Achilles can now enter the battlefield and win all the glory for himself. And that's what happens, okay? He kills Hector. He saves the Greeks. But then he goes crazy. What he does is he ties Hector to his chariot, and he starts riding around the walls of Troy. It is a war crime. It's disgusting. It's hideous. The Trojans are going crazy, but the Greeks are like, we don't want this, man. The gods are like, what the hell is going on? Okay? So this is just shocking. It's just a mutilation. It's torture. All right, so now we move to the end of the Iliad. And at this point, Priam, the king, cannot sleep because his son, Hector, is being mutilated by Achilles. Achilles can't sleep because he cannot forgive himself for the death of Patroclus. And so he takes it out on Hector. Okay, and the gods are watching this, and they're kind of disgusted. The games are over now. The gathered army scattered, each man to his fast ship, and fighters turned their minds off thoughts of food and the sweet, warm grip of sleep. But Achilles kept on grieving for his friend, the memory burning on. And all subduing sleep could not take him. But not now. He turned and twisted side to side. He longed for Patroclus' manhood, his gallant heart. What rough campaigns they fought to an end together. What hardships they had suffered, cleaving their way through wars of men and pounding waves at sea. The memories flooded over him, live tears flowing. And now he lied on his side, now flat on his back, now face down again. At last, he leapt to his feet, wandering anguish, aimless along the surf and dawn on dawn. Okay, he cannot sleep. He's depressed. Okay? He is racked with self-guilt. He cannot forgive himself for what has happened. Flaming over the sea and shore would find him pacing. Then he yoked his racing team to the chariot harness, lashed the corpse of Hector behind the car for dragging, and hauled him 3 times round the dead Patroclus' tomb. And then he rests again in his tents and leave the body sprawled face down in the dust. But Apollo pitied Hector, dead man though he was, and warded all corruption off from Hector's corpse, and round him, head to foot, the great god wrapped the golden shield of storm, so his skin would never rip as Achilles dragged him on. And so he kept on raging, shaming noble Hector, but the gods in bliss looked down and pitied Priam's son. They kept on urging the sharp-eyed giant killer Hermes to go and steal the body, a plan that pleased them all, but not Hera, Poseidon, or the girl with blazing eyes. They clung to their deathless hate of sacred Troy, Priam and Priam's people, just as they had at first when Paris in all his madness launched the war. He offended Athena and Hera, both goddesses. But Zeus, who marshaled the storm clouds, warned his queen, now Hera, don't fly into such a rage at fellow gods. These two can never attain the same degree of honor. Still, the immortals love Prince Hector dearly, best of all the mortals born in Troy. So I loved him at least. He never sinned with gifts to please my heart. Never once did my altar lack its share of victims. Wine cups tipped and the deep smoky savior. These are the gifts we claim. These are our rights. But as for stealing courageous Hector's body, we must abandon the idea, not a chance in the world behind Achilles' back. For Thetis is always there, his mother always hovering near him night and day. So, would one of you gods call Thetis to my presence, so I can declare to her my solemn sound decree? Achilles must receive a ransom from King Priam. Achilles must give Hector's body back, okay? Does that make sense? So the gods are fighting over what to do, and then Zeus says, you know what? Let's just broker a peace between Achilles and Priam. Okay, so Priam agrees to ransom back Hector's body, and Achilles agrees. Okay, so again, we can write this in modern prose, and we can eliminate the gods. But what you'll see is that it's not as powerful, it's not as intriguing, not as truthful. Priam cannot sleep and toss in his bed. His wife and his children come one by one to console the weeping king, but to no avail. His servants try different sleeping potions, and one by one they fail. In the middle of the night, he screams at the moon and tears at his graying hair. Priam aches for Hector and feels guilt and remorse for failing his son. Trojan spies watch Achilles drag Hector's body day and night. They take turns spying, and they know that Achilles cannot sleep. They report this news to Priam, and this gives him hope. He sends an emissary to the Greek camp, and Agamemnon agrees that it is Priam's right to ransom back his son, as is a custom of war. Even after the rage of Achilles, Agamemnon sends a servant to talk with Achilles. Achilles does not hear Priam's offer, but he nods his head anyway, okay? So it's less powerful, it's less truthful, it's less interesting, okay? All right, now comes the most powerful part of the Iliad. Okay, this is actually when Priam and Achilles meet for the first time. And so what happens is that Priam is snuck into the tent by Hermes, and the majestic king of Troy slipped past the rest and kneeling down beside Achilles, claps his knees and kisses his hands, those terrible man-killing hands that had slaughtered Priam's many sons in battle. So the king has the opportunity to kill Achilles, but chooses instead to kiss his hand and submit before Achilles. And this submission destroys the pride of Achilles. Okay? It's an emotional battle, duel between Priam and Achilles, and Priam has won. Awesome, as when a group of madness seizes one who murders a man in his own fatherland and flees abroad to foreign shores, to a wealthy noble host, and a sense of marvel runs through all who see him. So Achilles marveled, beholding majestic Priam. Okay, that's what Priam has done. Priam is like a fugitive who's wanted for murder. He escaped, and he should be a slave, but somehow he's become wealthy. Okay, so by submitting himself before Achilles, Priam has changed the destiny of the world. His men marveled too, trading startled glances, but Priam prayed his heart out to Achilles. Remember your own father, great god like Achilles, as old as I am, past the threshold of deadly old age. Now doubt the countrymen round about him plague him now. With no one there to defend him, beat away disaster. No one, but at least he hears you're still alive, and his old heart rejoices, hopes rising day by day, to see his beloved son come sailing home from Troy. Those words stirred within Achilles a deep desire to grieve for his own father. Taking the old man's hand, he gently moved him back, and overpowered by memory, both men gave way to grief. Priam wept freely for man-killing Hector, throbbing, crouching before Achilles' feet as Achilles wept for himself. This is the first time Achilles can now cry. Okay, he could not cry before. Now for his father, now for Patroclus once again, and their sobbing rose and fell throughout the house. They've forgiven each other. Why? Because they love their people, okay? So Priam saw Hector in the face of Achilles. Achilles saw his father in the face of Priam. And because of their love for others, they found love for each other. So love is the unifying force of the universe. Love is what allows us to forgive ourselves and forgive others. Okay, and this is the tremendous insight of the Iliad, okay? And to demonstrate to you how powerful this insight is, let's run a scenario, okay? Let's do a thought experiment. Let's just say you're driving a car with your wife and your child home from a restaurant, okay? and you've had too much to drink, and then you hit a car, and your wife and your child died. Okay, that's the first scenario. Second scenario is you're driving home, and then a drunk driver hits you, killing your wife and your child. It's not your fault. It's the drunk driver's fault, okay? In the third scenario, you're arguing with your wife, and you're not really watching the road, okay? Then a drunk driver hits you and kills your wife and your child. Okay, these are three different scenarios, right? Let me ask you a question. In which scenario are you less likely to forgive the drunk driver? 1, 2, or 3? 1, it's your fault. 2 is it's his fault. 3 is it's his fault, but it's also your fault. Which one? It's number 3, guys. Okay? Why? Because you cannot forgive yourself first, all right? If you cannot forgive yourself, you can't forgive others. And guess what, guys? In real life, it's always number 3. It's almost never number 1 or number 2. So forgiveness is something that we encounter every day. All right? Every day we make mistakes, and because we can't forgive ourselves, we can make even more and more mistakes. Okay, that's a problem of forgiveness. And it's the deepest problem in human society. And so what the Iliad tells us is that the real struggle is not for power. The real struggle is within our heart. The real struggle is between ourselves. If we forgive ourselves, we can change the world. Right? If we forgive others, we make the world a better place. Because Priam forgave Achilles. Achilles was able to forgive himself, and they made the world a better place. Okay? That's the power of the human heart. And this is what gave rise to Greek civilization. Okay? The Greeks engaged in an oral tradition. And in their oral tradition, they were constantly trying to figure out the mysteries of the human heart. All right, so this is Pericles giving his famous funeral oration. So every day, people are speaking, because that's what a person does, speaks before others. All right? The Greeks were known for their theater. This is the amphitheater in Athens. You can see it seats about 10,000 people. And this is what they do for fun. They stage this theater, and everyone watches it, and the theater plays by Euripides, Aeschylus, Sophocles, are about the human heart, the mysteries of the human heart. So every day people are thinking about what it means to be human. And that's why they have the greatest civilization in the world. This is the agora, the marketplace, where people come together and just debate. They talk. So Socrates was famous for being in the agora, the marketplace, and just finding people to debate. This is the symposia. The symposia is a gathering of wealthy people. And what they do is they drink wine and they talk about philosophy, love, death, what's the meaning of life, okay? Now the wine is interesting because they'll water down the wine so it's not as strong, okay? And they'll do this for the entire night. This is Socrates engaging in a symposium on love. That's what they do for fun, guys. This is a trial of Socrates. So if you're charged with a crime, you face a trial. And there's 500 people, and you have to convince those 500 jurors why you're guilty or why you're not guilty, okay? All right, so this is an oral culture where every day people are talking with each other, and that's the source of their creativity. And what they're talking about is the Iliad, the Odyssey. They're trying to figure out what Homer meant, what Homer was trying to tell the world in his poetry. This is Herodotus. So even if you write, the first thing you do is when you write, you will recite your writings to everyone so you understand what the reaction is. Okay? Writing comes from community. It comes from understanding the feelings of others. Okay? Today we just write by ourselves, and that's why our writing is crap. All right, so this is Anna Karenina, considered the greatest novel of the modern period. It's written by Leo Tolstoy. And it's a really fun novel. I highly recommend it. It's a great book. Okay, and it starts off by saying, happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Everything was in confusion in the Oblonsky's house. The wife had discovered that the husband was carrying on an intrigue with a French girl, okay? So it starts off with an affair. Well, what happened is that the husband's sister, Anna Karenina, will come from St. Petersburg to try to resolve the issue. But then she'll fall in love with another man, Count Vronsky, and they have an affair together. Okay, and this affair destroys their families. And it ends with Anna Karenina's suicide, okay? Because what's happening is that she's demanding more and more Count Vronsky, and he can't keep up. He's exhausted by the demands of Anna Karenina. So this is what she says before she kills herself. My love keeps growing more passionate and egoistic, while his is waning, and that's why we're drifting apart. She went on musing, and there's no hope for it. He is everything for me, and I want him more and more to give himself up to me entirely. And he wants more and more to get away from me. We walk to meet each other up to the time of our love, and then we have been irresistibly drifting in different directions. There's no altering that. He tells me I'm insanely jealous, and I've told myself that I am insanely jealous, but it's not true. I'm not jealous, but I am unsatisfied. I don't have any meaning in my life. And I want this love to give me meaning, okay? So it's almost like she's looking for God. We've killed God, and now she's looking for God in affairs, in sex, in lust. And that's why she can't find it, okay? All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and translate it into Homeric prose, okay? Let's see how Homer wrote this. I'm not Homer, okay? But like, this is how he might have written it, okay? Anna Karenina went to the train station and sat on the bench waiting for the train to come. Her thoughts are empty and her head low. Where do you plan to go? Someone asked from the corner. That snapped Anna from her trance, and to her horror, she saw herself. But it was not herself. She was older, with graying hair and drooping eyes. And Anna looked as though she had seen a ghost, okay? So she's hallucinating herself 20 years from now, all right? Who are you? Anna shouted in horror. What do you want? Where will you go? The older Anna asked. Where's Vronsky? Anna shouted. She looked around. The train station was empty. Okay. You know where he is, the older Anna said, with a look of pity on her wrinkled face. Anna got up and walked away. She was being followed. So she knows that in time, she'll just all be alone. Okay. She sees her own future. Anna, where are you going? The older Anna asked. Stop following me, Anna shouted back, picking up the pace. I am going to a place where you can't find me. Don't do anything rash, the older Anna said, chasing after her. Leave me alone, Anna shouted, and she ran and ran, screaming and screaming. She tripped and fell into the tracks right in front of the train, and then she died. Okay? So, if you do it this way, it gives you more insight into the human mind, the human psyche. Right? And that's what we've forgotten. So what happens when we stop believing in the spiritual? What happens when we disconnect from the right hemisphere of our brain? We clutter our brains with insignificant concerns, pursuits, and details in search of significance. When we kill God, anything can be God, okay? So as I said, Anna Karenina, with her affair, she's looking for God. She's looking for meaning. And before, when we hallucinated, when we talked with the gods, we had meaning, we had wisdom, we had significance, and now we've lost it. And the result is what we call modern literature, which is complete and utter crap, by the way, okay? And we know because this is Virginia Woolf to the Lighthouse, okay? It's considered one of the greatest novels of the 20th century. It's not very good, all right? So, this is a woman talking to herself. It's what we call stream of consciousness. There were the eternal problems, suffering, death, the poor. There was always a woman dying of cancer, even here, and yet she had said to all these children, you shall go through with it. To 8 people, she had said relentlessly that, and the bill for the greenhouse would be 50 pounds. For that reason, knowing what was before then, love and ambition, and being wretched alone in dreary places, she had often the feeling, why must they grow up and lose it all, okay? So her mind is just wandering, and she's concerned about the grocery bill, she's concerned about the future, she's concerned about the past. There's no discipline, there's no focus to any of her ideas, okay? And this is what we call stream of consciousness. And it's the way we think today, okay? The reality is that we live in a world in which God is dead, in which we're not allowed to imagine a spiritual world, in a world in which we only focus on the here and now. And as such, we live meaningless, insignificant lives, and as such, our brains are just focused on things that don't matter, okay? And our brains become schizophrenic, all right? Okay, does that make sense, guys? Okay. Yeah? Any questions? All right. Yeah.
I have a question about the concept about forgiveness that you just mentioned, that if you can't forgive yourself, you can't forgive others. I think the example of this is China and Japan, because China hates Japan because of the Japan invasion war. And after hearing this call, I think China hates Japan so much, even until now. It is because that China cannot forgive himself because he's too weak, and also just like the third situation that you just showed. Japan invades and China is too weak to fight back, so China cannot forgive his weakness, so he cannot forgive Japan.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I completely agree. Yeah, because if you're really strong and confident, you just focus on improving yourself. You don't think about other people. Yeah. Okay. Any more questions, guys? But thank you for the comment. Okay. All right. So last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to read some YouTube comments. So I don't have time to read YouTube comments, but my wife loves reading YouTube comments, and she sends me YouTube comments, and it's basically my homework. Okay. So if my wife sends it to me, I have to respond. All right. So let's look at some YouTube comments from the last video. West the Qatar says, "Hey man, what about Africa? What about Egypt and African civilization?" And I'm sure that Africa, Egypt, Sudan are really, really interesting. I don't know enough about it to comment on it, okay? So what I want to do is later on, I want to focus more on Africa, okay? I want to go to Africa and I want to learn more about the continent so I can comment more about Africa. Like for me, teaching is a learning journey, okay? I teach to learn. Okay. So this YouTuber says, Bad Bantham says, I underrepresent livestock in the economic system. And this is absolutely true, okay? If you look at the steppes, the currency is actually livestock. Cattle, sheep are the main currency of the steppe people. And it's what allows the steppe people to fight great wars, because when they go off in wars, they can bring the livestock with them. And therefore, they don't have any logistical issues, okay? So this comment is absolutely right. Question. So capital changes altruistic nature to utilitarian when hardworking motivation gets saturated. Why are we only going in one direction that's getting saturated? Yeah, so this is interesting. So we have two natures, an altruistic and utilitarian nature. And what we've discovered is that if you break the balance and you become too utilitarian, it's almost impossible to move it back. Okay? And that's why societies collapse. How similar is this series to Civilization series? Okay, so the comment is that I'm using a lot of content that I used before in Civilization. And yeah, that is a fair criticism. And the reason why is that what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to better understand history. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to analyze history from different angles. So last year when I taught Civilization, I was trying to just figure out how civilization worked. And this year, what I'm trying to do is trying to apply the idea of secret societies to the better understanding of civilization. So I know some of the content is repeating itself, but the angle, the slant, the overthesis has changed, okay? And I'm going over a lot of this information in order to build a case of why we have secret societies, all right? How do we manage to produce during these horrible times? Same question I asked myself yesterday, okay? So the question is, what if children when things are getting worse and worse? And the answer is, because children is what gives us hope. Children is what gives us purpose. When you see that the world has collapsed, or when you see the world is in chaos, you have children, because children give you the energy, the motivation, inspiration to fight for a better world. Okay, so I am probably the most pessimistic person on planet Earth. Okay, I think the entire world is going to hell. I have three kids. I have three young kids. And the reason why is, well, first of all, I love my kids. I love having children. But also, my children fill me with hope and energy and power to fight for a better world. I'm only doing this. I'm only teaching this class. I'm only putting this on YouTube to build a legacy for my children. If it were not for my children, I would honestly not be doing this. It's really hard work. Okay? All right, so that is it for today. Thank you guys. We'll continue next week, okay?